Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптям посорбати довбані щі, та трохи в ущах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 111 of the news.
And tonight we're going to be, of course, reporting the past 48 hours of the news since we just got off the Monday break, which I have to say was great. It's always good to get a little bit of a reprieve, and of course, just a break, but I'm happy to be back, and we're once again going to be reporting the news. So before we actually get to the scheduling for tonight, we have a huge announcement to make. Moscow Mike has always been a character that's remained ever since he was brought on. Um, while there's a bit of a history surrounding Moscow Mike, he has always remained within the public's eye, I guess you could say, and people have remembered him for almost 100 days at this point, it seems. So, we've decided to do a little something for him, but before we actually talk about what we did for him, there's also a little bit of a thing we have going on here in the comments section with Russian bots that come in every once in a while and they just cry their eyes out about how the war is actually going in their favor and they're winning. But before we even talk about that, there's a great guy who was just put on stream a little bit while ago called Professor Mortar, who showed us how to make a projectile codenamed Alabama. And you wouldn't believe it, but we have actually made every single one of these in this limited edition run a merchandise item. So I'm going to show you all this real quick because they are actually really good. Starting off, we actually have a Moscow Mike hoodie and tee, and it's actually pretty good. Matthew put in a lot of effort into these, and you can see there's Moscow Mike. Who is he? Well, obviously in that picture he's Putin, but no one really knows who Moscow Mike is except for Matthew and me. So if you would like to get one of these, it's pretty cool, but if you would like a mug to add on to it, we actually have a mug for you to collect the tears of all the Russian bots that have ever come onto the stream, and you can sip them with glee. As we all know, they love to come in here and cry, and so if you would like to be able to just put your mug under your computer screen and collect up all the tears of the Russian bots as the stream goes, this is the mug for you. And last but not least, we do have Professor Mortar. Professor Mortar is a new joke that was on this stream, and we can see him right here showing us how to make the codename Alabama projectile, which is the coolest thing. I didn't know it was called codename Alabama, but it is. And so if you would like to get any of these, we actually made sure to make the widest variety possible this time because we had a whole bunch of stuff that we had been keeping in, I guess you could say, the back rooms for a bit, trying to design it up, and we made them all, and we were just like, you know what, let's just drop them all at the same time, because we don't want people to like get bored waiting for them, and they look really cool on top of that. And we also have stickers, and these are actually cut out, customized stickers, which are the coolest thing, and the first time we've ever done this. And so, if you would like to support the channel, please make sure to go over to the merchandise store and get some. They are really cool. We always try and make sure the designs are worthy of actually getting, unlike some other channels out there that are actually really large, like some Minecraft YouTubing channels. Not going to name any names, but their merch isn't nice. We always try and make sure ours is actually pretty cool looking. So hopefully y'all will get some, and hopefully y'all can enjoy the Tears of Russian Bots wearing your Moscow Mike shirt with your Professor Mortar sticker on or near your PC. So with that, we're now going to be getting into tonight's schedule for the news. We've, of course, have 2 whole days to cover, and what's incredible to note is that over these past 48 hours, we have not seen any major ground being taken by either side, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians. It does appear that this war is starting to fall into a stalemate, and I'm going to go into tonight into great detail why it's very important for Western countries to send over supplies right now in the largest bulk amounts that they can, because Ukraine is counting on them at this point. So we'll cover that later on the stream, but let's start off with our schedule. Starting off, we're actually going to start in Russia. We only have one bit of news to cover here, and once we cover that news, we're immediately going to go down to our location unknowns and also the Sumy area. This whole entire Russia, Sumy, and location unknown bits will be covered all as one segment. Once we cover that segment, we'll then be moving on to the Kharkiv area and the northern Donbass. But before we get there, we're of course going to answer 3 questions from the chat. After we answer those 3 questions, we'll move on to the Kharkiv and northern Donbass area. Once we cover that news, we'll once again pause to take 3 questions from the chat. We'll then move on down to the southern Donbass, the rest of the news from around the country. Let me make sure we have no international. We don't have any international news. And then we'll go up to Kyiv to address 2 things that Zelensky's actually talked about today. And so with that, tonight's actually a huge night in news. We've never had a bit of news where there's been such a bloody onslaught going on for both sides, yet no grounds being made. So this is actually a bit of a historic night because I can't talk about any ground being made, but I can assure you that the fighting is intense. So starting off in Russia, we've actually seen some, I guess you could say, partisan activity, but not partisan activity in the way we usually think. Usually, whenever we think of partisan activity, we think about, saboteurs attacking some kind of important building, a historical structure, or maybe some kind of a factory that's producing military arms. Rarely ever do we actually cover any kind of a hacking attempt because, first off, we hardly hear about them. And secondly, any kind of a broadcast takeover. But today actually on day 110, we saw that a broadcasting hack happened and someone actually hacked Channel 1 on Russian TV and filled it with pro-Ukrainian propaganda showing some of the, I guess you could say, twisted politicians in Russia and also the prisoners of war that were captured during the course of this ongoing war.
Потери российской армии на войне с Украиной составляют более 30 тысяч человек. А к 2023 году эта цифра достигнет 1,5 миллиона, включая мирное население.
We see them here listing off multiple statistics, also different politicians. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what they're saying, but this is propaganda by the Ukrainian side that has been hacked and uploaded onto one of Russia's main broadcasting stations. Which is honestly insane when you really think about it, that someone has the ability to hack onto a broadcasting network, one of the largest in Russia, and start, I guess you could say, uploading these kinds of videos. But it's great to see that pro-Ukrainian supporters have that kind of ability, because this is one of the few ways to actually reach the Russian public. They've been completely removed off of all social media platforms beyond the Russian ones, and so most of them are relegated to watching TV to get any kind of news on the war, and the Russian government has a monopoly on what's broadcasted over TV, and they've also passed a law saying pretty much that any reports on the war have to be approved by the government. And so now we can actually see that the Ukrainians, or pro-Ukrainian supporters, have now hacked one of the Russian TV channels and, of course, are uploading truth about what's going on in the war. And so it's good to know that some information is making it to the Russians in some shape or form. Moving on into Sumy, we can actually see that the Ukrainians are still preparing soldiers to go to the front or defend the nation's borders where there is no longer an active front line. Here in Sumy, we actually have two videos, but we're going to go to the first one I was just talking about, which is the training video of Ukrainian volunteers training in Sumy. So here's the video. It actually has copyrighted music. Some pretty good copyrighted music, by the way, but sadly I can't play it on stream. We can now see them training and crawling. We can see them in some kind of a gym. Now they're walking through the woods, apparently practicing squad formations. We can see them practicing dragging wounded soldiers. It looks like building clearing is part of their training. And we see that their training, I guess you could say, regimen is actually pretty thorough, much like most Western training programs. And considering that the Ukrainians are trying to utilize Western doctrine as much as possible, it would make sense that their training would be reflective of the quality of training that, say, a US or a British soldier would receive, or a French soldier. We can now see them once again walking through the woods. We're just really seeing a training montage here. And hopefully their training is actually as thorough as we're seeing on film, and they could be sent to the front lines or sent to the border where there's no longer an active front line and help to defend the country as best as possible. We've heard the rumors of a 1 million-man army being raised, and we don't know if that's true. We asked Starsky while he was on stream, and he said he didn't really know either. So I'm not sure if 1 million new soldiers are going to be raised for Ukraine to fight, but we do know that they are still training soldiers as much as they can, and they're trying to supply them as best as they can. And so hopefully these soldiers will be going to the front and helping to turn the tide of the war, but that's something we'll once again touch on later. Meanwhile, we've seen an old video that's never been seen until today, and so I made sure to add it into the stream, where we could see the Russians rob a store. And I actually got a lot of context on this, and it was actually really interesting to see what they picked out and stole. We can see the Russian soldiers walking up to the store. We can see the guy right here getting ready to bash in the window to the entrance of the store. He's now bashing it in. Some of his friends join him to try and get on the looting. He then continues to bash out the window. And finally, he crawls in, and then his buddies join him and crawl on in. Now they're met with a second door, which appears to be an obstacle for him for a short while, but with enough elbow grease, they open it. Now, here's the interesting thing. They go and pick out certain items throughout the store, and they just don't go and get creature comforts. We can see this guy here stocking up on as many batteries as possible. And you're about to see him just start piling them up on the counter. We can then see another guy pull out the cleaning rod on the AK, and it looks like he's trying to lockpick the cash register to try and get the money out of it, but he fails. So then they start wandering around, they start looking for bags, so that way they can load up the stuff they're about to steal. And we see one of them pick a bag that he likes a little bit. And now we can see something really interesting. And this was something that I've heard actually multiple explanations for when I was trying to figure out why in the world were they picking this stuff. This guy is smelling some kind of a perfume or a cologne. And the first thought would be, he's stealing this to send it back to his wife, or, girlfriend or whatever. And it turns out that there's apparently a secondary explanation. It could be either one, but apparently Russian soldiers may not be getting, maybe alcoholic, like some people are, and they aren't getting the amount of alcohol they need to stop themselves from, of course, kind of having a little bit of an alcoholic withdrawal. So apparently, cologne and perfume has just enough alcoholic content in it, although toxic, that they will drink a little bit or all of this cologne and have a little bit of a toxic shock, I guess you could say, but they'll also get a little bit of buzz out of its alcoholic content, and so they kind of fix their, I guess you could say, alcoholic binge for a little bit with this cologne or perfume, which is actually something pretty interesting to me. And then, of course, there's the obvious explanation, which I think would be more clear, is that he's trying to send this either back to his girl back at home, or he's going to use this for himself if it's a cologne. But when you see him actually smelling them and trying to pick some out, we can now see another guy stuffing the bag of one of the other soldiers. I just actually saw someone say this is perfume for their blow-up dolls, and it might be. I'm not going to rule that out either. We can now see them looking through even more stuff. And what's insane is that they're robbing the store, but they're treating it like it's a normal shopping run, which is the wildest thing. We can now see them packing up the bags that they stole out of the store, and now they're leaving. And that's the end of the video, and it just shows you that the Russians, whenever they loot these buildings, they don't just go in there and try and strip the whole thing clean of everything it has. They're selectively going in there and trying to find specific items. And something that was really interesting to me was the batteries at the very beginning. Like the cologne and stuff, interesting dive, I guess you could say. But the batteries are something very interesting because they were packing up on them as much as they could. Either those are being used for their frontline units, like trying to operate drones or the remote controllers or other kinds of equipment that require like AA batteries, or there's such a battery shortage in Russia, even during this early time in the war when they robbed this store, that they were already trying to stock up on batteries, maybe to send home to their family, so that way they could just have some batteries to use. There's, of course, many explanations, but I found the idea of them stealing a massive amount of batteries to be somewhat interesting and indicative of some kind of issues of supply that the Russians are having with batteries even earlier on in the war. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Sumy, and we're now going to move into the location unknown news. And of course, we're going to start off on day 110, which is the blue markers, and then we'll move on to day 111, which are the dark gray markers. Starting off on day 110, we can actually see a Ukrainian convoy on the move. Of course, the location is unknown. We always try and keep them that way, so that way the Ukrainians aren't being given away. But we can see this convoy here rolling by this ambulance, it seems. And we're about to see what a normal Ukrainian convoy looks like. So we can first see some kind of a BTR with side skirts on it. I'm not really sure what they're specifically called. We can then see a second one. That one actually looks to be like a BTR-4 or a BTR-82. And it also has what appears to be anti-tank guided missile launchers attached to the side of the turret. So this, in terms of a BTR, like this vehicle, is actually highly equipped. I would say it's actually pretty modern in terms of its armament. Armor, not so much. We can now see another BTR passing by. It looks to largely be a mechanized infantry unit because there's a lack of tanks so far. And we can now see a couple of tanks rolling by. They appear to mostly be T-64 BVs, which are pretty decent, actually. They're actually, fun fact, so expensive to operate, at least during Soviet times, that was the reason that the T-72 was designed and was produced, was to be a cheaper I guess you could say, replacement for the T-64Bs, which were costing an incredible amount of money to build and maintain. But the Ukrainians used those almost exclusively, while the Russians used the T-72 almost entirely. Of course, they have some different tanks like T-80s, but for the large part, they're using these. The Ukrainians are using these only. So, an interesting video. It does show us what a normal Ukrainian convoy will look like, and while not that much better off than the Russians, because the Russians, of course, use a lot of BTRs and very similar tanks, you can tell that they have done a small amount of improvements to these vehicles. For example, the side plating. I guess I call it mesh plating because I'm not really into terminology too much. And we can also see the ATGMs mounted onto the turret, which is a huge upgrade compared to the standard BTR-82 for the Russians, which has no side mesh and also no ATGM launchers. So we can actually see a little bit of upgrades and improvements. And of course, it doesn't really matter. Ukrainian forces are better trained than the Russian counterparts, considering that they are contract soldiers, and they just generally are more proficient in the systems that they're using. So in that regard, the small improvements are actually a major improvement when factoring in training. With that, we're moving on to the next video, where we can see an anti-everything gun. And when I say anti-everything, I mean anti-everything. This thing is a 14.5 millimeter gun. I would say this thing is nearly the size of a tank gewehr, which we'll actually pull up tank gewehr, because I'm actually really interested to see if it is similar. It's the tank gewehr, which is famous for being one of the first anti-tank rifles in the world, is actually a 13.2 millimeter gun. So this thing is actually larger in caliber than a tank gewehr, and you're about to see Ukrainians shoot it. So we're just waiting for him to fire. And he also has a massive silencer on this thing. And you could see, the caliber of this round, I cannot say this enough. The caliber is massive. It's larger than a 50 BMG. And the recoil is so strong that even with this gun probably being as heavy as it is, when he fires it, he just gets pushed backwards a little bit like it's an artillery piece, which is insane to me. I don't know how they would use this thing. I'm assuming they would, I guess, use it as a sniper rifle. There's really no other way to use it, I would suppose. Or maybe against a armored personnel carrier, because it does have enough penetrative capabilities to go through the armor of a BMP or a BTR. But gosh, what a mammoth of a gun. Now, that is impressive, and I would like to see one in my local gun store to try and get, because that would be cool just to see. With that, we're moving on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the SBU, which is Ukrainian, I guess you could say secret police, or something similar to the FBI, taking down a Russian agent that's in Ukraine. So here we can see the supposed Russian agent walking down the road with a shopping bag in hand, and he's looking around suspiciously, like he's suspecting something's up. And we can now see the SBU run out of the van and tackle the guy and arrest him. While the Ukrainians, of course, have a lot of, I guess you could say, pro-Ukrainian saboteurs and operators within Russia, the same could be said for the Russians. The Russians, of course, are famously known for their spy organizations. They are, while not trying to diss on the Russians all the time, they are some of the best in the world, even if they're poorly funded compared to their counterparts. They're so good, even during Soviet times historically, that they were able to map Western cities better than most companies could that were based in the West, and were mapping out these cities to sell the maps, which is a very interesting story, and I highly suggest y'all pull that one up on YouTube, because it's very cool to look at. But of course, the Russians do have agents in Ukraine, and we can see a supposed agent here being arrested. We can see the Ukrainian soldier smack him on the butt. I'm not really sure why he did that. I guess he's spanking him like a kid. But we can see that they are now about to throw him in the van. And what a quick takedown. You wouldn't have suspected that to come from that van, but they hopped out of that van in a split second. That was actually pretty impressive. And it is good to see that the, I guess you could say, Ukrainian FBI is on top of things and is trying to make sure that Russian saboteurs, at least supposed ones, are arrested and looked into to make sure that they're not doing anything too questionable. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a drone in action. Now, this is from the Ukrainian side, and it is pretty neat to see the drone operator's perspective once again. We can see them zooming in on what appears to be a Russian tank. I'm assuming a T-72B3.
Пошел.
And we can see it get hit.
Следующий заход. Дырка, иди сюда. Он ні. Воїн повернувся з бойового завдання.
We now see the drone coming back in. They blurred most of the footage there, so that way we couldn't see what any sort of landmarks, I guess you could say, to get a location. But, you know, it's really just cool. We've seen it a lot, but it's just cool to see drones in operation and see how Ukrainians use them, because surprisingly, I guess you could say it's incredibly civilian-like, if you would like to call it that. There is no, like, military protocol to these things. They just fly them like recreational drones to a target. They look at it, say, that's a Russian target. They call an artillery, and then it gets bombarded, or they drop a bomblet from the drone. And it's really crazy to see all of this in action, because it's just like, wow, you know, it's like, that's just what Matthew and me would do for flying our drone, and they're doing that over in Ukraine, and they're actually calling in artillery or dropping bombs from them. And I would say that this is, once again, I guess you could say the infancy of drone warfare in its modern sense, and I think we're going to start seeing this more and more as war goes on, and it will start to become more and more refined in its purpose and also how the drones are made to deal with the specific tasks that I guess you could say they're going into. So a really cool video to see once again, and with that, we're on to the next one. Here in the next clip, we can actually see something that's pretty neat, I have to say. I bet y'all find it pretty neat too, but we can see Ukrainian soldiers in a field. Look at this one guy. You can just see him standing there. Pretty cool. And then when the camera comes back, you see a whole bunch of Ukrainian soldiers in ghillie suits getting up out of the field, and you wouldn't have even known they were there if they hadn't stood up. And I gotta say, that is impressive camouflage. Now, the question for me is, would this stand up to thermal? I don't think it would. I think they would be picked up off of heat alone, but what a cool thing that the ghillie suits are that good that, going back to the very start of the video, you can't even tell they're here. While the video quality is a little bit low, I'll give it that, but still, even if it wasn't low, it's very hard to distinguish them from the ground, and that, in its own right, is just cool to see. I don't know how many ghillie suits they have. Obviously, this isn't something issued to every single soldier, but for the sniper teams, it's going to be hard as all get out for the Russians to ever figure out where these snipers are, unless they have some kind of a thermal imaging system, because they're going to blend in with the ground almost entirely. So a really cool video to see, and hopefully these ghillie suits do help out the Ukrainians in getting the upper hand on the Russians in the places that it counts. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we see Ukrainian troops being hit by mortar fire under a bridge. While I do try and show everything in this war, sometimes it is a little bit unfortunate, and I always preface these videos with this, because some people hopping on the stream are going to be going, oh, you're a Russian shill, because a lot of people make a judgment on a first impression, and then a lot of people, you know, there's just a million people out there. But anyways, I was trying to show everything I can that is in this war, and we can see here some Ukrainian soldiers that are sheltering under a bridge, and Russian mortar and artillery fire is landing around them and getting very close to where they are under this bridge. So we see that the first mortar round actually hit on the road. We can see that the second mortar round hit to the right side of the bridge and below it. Some of the shrapnel may have gone up under the bridge. We can now see another round coming in on the other side of the bridge, on the left side. Shrapnel may be flying up under the bridge. That round was almost entirely under the bridge. It appeared that it couldn't even have its entire, I guess you could say, dust plume flick up, because it actually got caught under the bridge. So that was pretty much a direct artillery hit. Another hit right on the bridge. And it's unbelievable to think that there are dozens of brave men, and they faced down this war for 111 days. And they are going through hell on earth down under that bridge right now. And the whole and the thing is that we're sitting here watching it on a video, thousands of miles away, most of us in relative safety. We do have a decent amount of Ukrainian viewers which are near the war, but a lot of us are just watching this in complete safety, like I am. And it doesn't really hit you, because it's been 11 days, 111 days now, and a lot of y'all have been watching for that long. And it doesn't really hit anymore, and you don't really stop to think anymore that these are actual brave men that we saw at the beginning of the war, that are under that bridge going through hell on earth, getting injured and killed to continue on defending their country. And it's something that every once in a while I have to stop and remind myself of, because at this point, 111 days of seeing this, sometimes you will get a little bit removed from what it actually is and what's happening. But you've got to give it to these Ukrainian soldiers. They never give up, even under situations like this. And also, I just saw someone talking about they need more artillery, and we're about to get to that here in a little bit once we get to the northern Donbass area. So stick around if you would like to hear my thoughts on that, because I, of course, have some pretty good thoughts on it tonight, at least because I started viewing the whole entire picture as a whole. Actually, we'll talk about it after this video. We can now see another hit right under the bridge. While Russian artillery usually isn't accurate, I'm going to have to say on this one, it's fairly accurate, and it's hitting Ukrainian positions nearly dead on under this bridge. Sometimes the artillery shells are actually able to slip under the bridge just a little bit and explode right under it. We can see that the shells continue to land, just one after the other. We don't even know what the condition of these brave Ukrainian soldiers are down there, but they're still hanging in. We haven't seen any of them try to run, you know, because at this point you would think that it would take them over to try and run, but they still are holding their positions as best they can under that bridge. A lot of them may be wounded or killed, and the other soldiers are most likely trying to tend to them and call in on the radio that there needs to be some kind of medical assistance or a medical evac or something like that, and they're trying to keep their calm and keep as collected as possible. And they've continued to do this kind of stuff for 111 days. We're about to enter in about 9 days into the 5th month of this war and round out the 4th month. That's how long this has been going on. And with that, that's the end of the video. And hopefully the Ukrainian soldiers that were under there may be all right. I would assume with that many artillery hits on them, honestly, a lot of them may have been injured. And so hopefully if they were injured or killed, their bodies can be recovered for a decent funeral, and the wounded can be evacuated to get the medical care they need. And once again, I also want to point out something else before we move on to the artillery talk. On the Sunday night fundraiser, we raised $17,730-ish, I think, give or take, because it does climb a little bit. But we've raised over $17,000 on that fundraiser and almost got to our goal. We were only $3,000 away from our $20,000 goal, and I have to say, I was floored and amazed to see that we were able to get $17,000. And believe it or not, but that put us over the $300,000 mark, and we've raised in total $308,775 and I believe 30 cents in support of Ukraine so far. And it's honestly impressive to think, and that support may be helping out those soldiers that were caught under that bridge right there and put into terrible circumstances. Some of those soldiers may be going to a hospital, and some of those hospitals may have Doctors Without Borders surgeons inside of them that are able to operate based off of the funds we're sending over. And when you put that into perspective, the Lee Spring Army, the collective efforts of every single one of y'all, is actually saving lives over there in Ukraine. And I can't thank y'all enough for that, because when you really think about what these people are going through, pretty much in the defense of the entirety of Western Europe, it is impressive. And it's a incredible and honorable thing that they're doing. And I'm glad that we're able to support them and help them out as much as we can. So with that, we're now going to talk about the artillery situation a little bit, because it's, of course, incredibly important. And it's something that we've seen Western governments lolling around on. Right now, we've seen that the entire front line has fallen into a stalemate. The Russians are in a very fragile logistical situation as well. They can only supply their forces to 100% capacity if the entirety of the front line is almost at a complete standstill and static. They can only have one small front operational, which is near the Severodonetsk area, and that is it. Anything beyond that, they're going to be eating up resources that they really can't replace. So that's why we don't see a lot of action anymore from the Russians, all the way from Kharkiv to Lyman. This entire area has pretty much been static almost for over a month. And we've seen past the Donetsk region, this entire front line from Volnovakha all the way to Kherson has been inactive as well. And the Russians haven't really tried to push out in any way, shape, or form. And that's because if they do, they're going to be eating up supplies that their logistic forces cannot replace. And so the Russians are in a very precarious situation right now. And if the Ukrainians just had a little bit of extra muscle in the terms of artillery or any kind of support to be able to conduct more counterattacks, they're going to start hitting the Russians on the front lines where they've been static and able to build up their supplies, and they're going to whittle down those supplies that they cannot replace anymore and run them into a terrible position where either they have to give up their offensive in the Donbass and try and hold on to everything they have, or just let the front line collapse. And so in that perspective, it is critically important. I would say that this is, I guess you could say, the tipping point in terms of Western support. Either we get the stuff over there, and we actually get it into Ukrainian hands as fast as possible and have them using it within, I would say, 2 weeks, or this entire war will drag on maybe well into the early part of next year. And honestly, I would say that it's very important to send those supplies over, because when you look at the entire situation, the Ukrainians could start to win this war and maybe have it done with before the end of this year, instead of, I guess you could say, waiting well into next year because they didn't get the support they needed to actually push the Russians at an opportune time, which is right now. So with that in mind, I think I would highly recommend that a lot of y'all should call up your congressmen or politicians if you're not from the United States and tell them you would like more support to be sent to Ukraine and you think it should be sent right now. Hopefully that will reach them. Of course, you know, it's a wishful goal to think that it will reach them, but hopefully it will, and hopefully we can get some support to the Ukrainians that they desperately need so they can conduct the counterattacks that look possible and gain back a decent amount of ground before the end of the year. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a little bit of mine clearing. We can actually see the Ukrainians using a mine clearer, which is pretty new, actually. We've rarely ever seen videos of the Ukrainians using these, but this time we did. So here's the video. We see a whole bunch of Ukrainian soldiers up there standing near a hedgerow. It looks like they may be trying to look over it. Now hear the mine clearing device being fired. And that little thread right there that you're seeing fly off actually has an explosive charge. And we can now see the second mine clearing device being fired. And it's also traveling out in the same direction. And when these things explode, they blow up all the mines around them and under them, and it clears a path for the, I guess you could say, Ukrainian forces to go through. So hopefully they did clear a path and the infantry was able to pass through that minefield, and it's incredibly interesting to see these mine clearing devices in operation. We've actually seen the Russians using something similar to this, but they weren't using it for mine clearing, they were using them within urban centers to attack supposed Ukrainian infantry forces within skyscrapers and apartment blocks and such things like that. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can then see a Ukrainian tank backing into a ditch. This is actually a little bit of an interesting film made by a Russian drone, where we can see some Ukrainian units come under fire, and it appears that this tank was trying to back up as fast as possible out of the fire, and happened to fall into an old foundation that was on the ground, and it just fell into it. And you can see it right here. It backs in, it tilts upwards, and now it's stuck. Hopefully the Ukrainians can pull that tank out, but it does look like it's in pretty deep, and that foundation went pretty far into the ground, because the tank's almost sticking straight upwards. So an unfortunate video, but I thought I would show it because it was an interesting thing that we hadn't seen before. Once again, tanks can't really see behind them all too well, and the commander may have given this driver the order to back up without knowing there was a large empty basement behind them, I guess you could say. And so the tank driver just continued to back up until they fell into this ditch. An interesting video to see, and hopefully they can recover the tank. We're now going to be moving on to day 111 of the Location Unknown news, where we can see drone warfare at its finest. Another interesting example, and we can actually see that this was done by Radio Free Europe, which is actually an incredible news organization. Highly suggest y'all go and check them out, but we can actually see them showing off how both the Russians and the Ukrainians have been using drones during this war.
Так звані байти.
Ми працюємо в тому напрямку, так?
Так, я його поставив. Ти побачиш один перед. Оскільки це в першу чергу цивільний дрон, і треба розуміти, що в нього дуже можливості обмежені. Відповідно, стараємося з їхнього ТТХ вижати по максимуму, для того, щоб максимально ефективно використовувати їх в бойових умовах. Ми залетіли фактично на відстані 4 кілометри. Подивилися, зробили декілька відео, декілька фото. Просто екран деколи не дозволяє побачити, що відбувається, тому що він дуже маленький.
Тобто GPS-сигналу у нас взагалі немає. Але це добре, бо деколи вони дають фейкові координати, і він при втраті сигналу починає рухатися а-ля до свого дому, який насправді знаходиться десь в них. І це ще гірша ситуація, ніж коли просто немає GPS-сигналу, тоді він хоча б не втікає від мене при втраті сигналу. Ось. От зараз знову пропав сигнал повністю.
Все, готові. Погнали.
Тому якщо він виживає тижня, 2-3, це дуже добре. Якщо він виконує задачу, є якісь бойові задачі і він виконує їх успішно, це вже добре. Тому що, грубо кажучи, дрон там без тепловізора коштує там 4-5 тисяч доларів. Ну, з тепловізором він там коштує десь 8 тисяч доларів. Але якщо завдяки дрону було знайдені координати або знайдений противник з танком і артилерія була успішно наведена, то співвідношення ціни дрона і ціна танку, ну ви самі розумієте, що дрон свою задачу зробив і він себе окупив.
Якщо ж безпілотник попадає в зону дії нашої ППО, безумовно по ньому застосовується озброєння. Все частіше вже застосовується озброєння протиповітряної оборони сухопутних військ. Зенітний ракетний комплекс ОСА успішно знищує саме Орлан-10, який найпоширеніше застосовується. Крім того, використовуються, звичайно, і засоби радіоелектронної боротьби для їх знешкодження, ну і знищення відповідно.
And of course, huge credit to Radio Free Europe for giving us very interesting and in-depth stories about how some of the stuff in the war in Ukraine is going. And it is interesting to see, of course, the Ukrainian mindset, which has been my mindset, is that civilian drones are incredibly cheap, most of the time, much cheaper than, I guess you could say, the counterparts that they could use, like, you know, military drones and such things like that. And so they're cost effective. You know, like a $500 drone can knock out a $3.5 million tank, and if it gets killed or shot down directly afterwards, it's no big loss because it was only $500 and it knocked out a $3.5 million tank. So, of course, it's interesting to see that, and it does show you how much, I guess you could say, economics and money plays into a war and how it can be fought. And basically, it comes down to how much economic power can you levy against the other side and also field the equipment that you can afford. So, of course, an interesting insight into how the drones work, and it's good to see that the Ukrainians are using them to a pretty good extent, but we also see that the Russians are catching on and they're starting to use them as well. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we see a Stugna giving a treat to the Russians. We can see that it says it's giving them a little bit of treatment, but I put down treats because I think the Stugna is a little treat. But anyways,
по готовности огонь.
we can now see them aiming the Stugna. I'm actually going to make a correction here. I don't believe this is a Stugna because we can see that the operator is actually looking through some kind of scope on the ATGM, and the Stugna does not do that. You operate it from a little console beside it out in the distance. So I believe this may be like a Fago or something, or a Concours. I'm not exactly sure, but it is not a, I guess you would say, Stugna. You now see the Stugna on its way. And you can see it hit a target right down there. There was a small little flash of light, and it hit its target. And we now see a smoke
Попадание,
plume rising
охуеть.
up from it, which lets us know that that vehicle was knocked out. Regardless of whatever kind of ATGM that was, it did hit the target, and it did wipe it out. Good to see, and it's great to know that the anti-tank units of the Ukrainian forces are still churning out the tank losses every single day for the Russians. We're going to move on to the next bit of news where we can actually see the Ukrainians observing a destroyed BMP-3. This BMP-3 was of course destroyed earlier on, apparently in the day, and the Ukrainians eventually moved their way up to it to inspect the damage.
Надо на те. Дай.
That's the end of the video, but of course, great to see that the Ukrainians have knocked out another BMP-3. The Russians don't have as many of those as they have of, say, BMP-2s or BMP-1s. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we see a Russian officer actually burning his passport in protest against what the Russians have been doing. Unfortunately, I don't have a speech-to-text translation for this, but I'm going to let y'all see this man make his speech against the Russian government and then burn his passport.
Я, Цопик Станислав Николаевич, 11.05.1968 года рождения, подданный Российской Федерации, был офицером Российской Федерации, уволился в 1994 году. Я осуждаю Российскую Федерацию как страну-агрессору по отношению к мирному населению данной страны. И в знак протеста я сжигаю паспорт данного государства. Почему? Потому что я не хочу не иметь никакого отношения к данной стране, потому как брат, который назывался братом, напал на мирных жителей данной страны. Слава Украине, героям слава!
We now see him take a lighter to his passport, and he starts to burn it up. Passports are somewhat fireproof, but this man is determined in showing his detestment for the Russians and what they're doing, and he finally called fire to his passport, and it looks like it's going to start burning quite nicely pretty soon. It's interesting to see that even a former Russian officer in the military is detesting Russia's actions as well, which does give you a pretty good idea of how a decent amount of Russian people are still against this war, although we don't hear from them anymore. Of course, they're largely a silent majority. They are inside of Russia, but of course, if they speak their minds, they'll be prosecuted and most likely arrested and put in jail for an incredibly long amount of time for what they believe. So a lot of them stay quiet, but we can see this man, who actually was in the military, take his stand against what the Russians are doing. And that's great to see, and it's good to know that people within Russia, or people who are Russians, still see that the Russians and what they're doing is wrong. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we can actually see some Ukrainian soldiers that are some quick learners. And when I mean quick, they are incredibly quick. Here's the video of these soldiers learning how to use what appears to be a dishka within a minute.
Та не грязно.
We can now see them firing the dishka. One round at a time. This guy is daring. I don't know if the dishka doesn't have a jamming issue. It does seem like it has a jamming issue. It just jammed. And that's the end of the video. But it was actually pretty cool to see, and we can see that apparently this guy who is learning how to use the dishka actually picks up on it pretty quickly, and hopefully he can use those skills on the front lines very soon. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we can see Ukrainian artillery hitting a few Russian vehicles. Here's the video, and we can see that an artillery shell just landed near this Russian tank, and it continues to try and speed down the road as fast as possible. We can now see an artillery shell landing near a crossroads, and we can see a destroyed civilian car, it appears, on the actual paved road. And we can't see what's in the plume of smoke there. We're not really sure if there's a T-72 in there at the moment. The footage is now fast forwarded, and we can actually see a burning Russian vehicle in the tree line that was just stricken where the tank was driving away, and another Russian tank that is also nestled into the bushes on that tree line. We now see the artillery hitting the tree line once more, and we can see that it apparently hit something as sparks and what appeared to be burning ammunition began to fly out, and now we can see that a nice bonfire has begun on this tank. You can always tell when an ammunition, I guess you could say, stowage inside of a vehicle has been hit, because it's always a very fiery explosion. It looks like something that comes out of a Hollywood movie. We can now see what appeared to be an abandoned BMP-2 with all of its stuff strewn about, and it looks like the crew in this one managed to abandon the tank before the Ukrainians even decided to destroy it, and so this one actually got away a-okay. With that, we're now going to move on out of the location unknowns. We have one left. We can actually see some Ukrainian soldiers enduring some heavy shelling. We don't know where the location was, but the artillery fire was incredibly close, and you can see that it doesn't really faze the Ukrainians much, who just sit in the trench and just wait it out. So here's the video. Pretty cool to see. Once again, the Ukrainians have enough morale, or enough, I guess you could say, bravery about themselves to just try and let the artillery fire not bother them, and they hardly even flinch when it comes down around them. It's good to see that that kind of heroism and bravery still exists in the modern world, and of course, pretty much every single Ukrainian soldier is a perfect example of what bravery or courage under fire looks like. So we're now going to be moving on out of the location unknown news, and we're now going to start moving towards the Kharkiv area and also the northern Donbass. But before we actually get there, we're going to take a quick pause and answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we'll return back to the news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up tonight, as always, we were getting quite a bit of questions in, and some really good ones as well. So first up from our super chats, we have a $50 donation from Bob the Viking, formerly known as Praise Adonai, who is a longtime channel supporter, who says, Enforcer Matt, the media is now downplaying any victory by Ukraine. Politicians are slithering off the bus. What can the Leaf Spring Army do to seriously help Ukraine win the war and make a difference?
Well, one thing at this point that we could seriously do to try and help, and of course, while I do think that the Leaf Spring Army is a power to be reckoned with pretty much in terms of getting support for Ukraine, at the same time, our powers are somewhat limited. But the answer to that question I would give is calling up your representatives, your government officials, and letting them know that you support the Ukrainians and you support them getting more supplies. That may change some of their minds where they may actually support Ukraine. Beyond that, of course, our Sunday fundraisers do manage to help out the Ukrainians a pretty good deal. And those are really the only 2 ways that our channel is able to help out, is either by having our viewers call your congressional representatives or your government officials if you're from the international world, or by helping out the Sunday fundraisers. So I thank you so much for the support, Praise Adonai. Of course, it helps us out greatly, and I thank you so much for the support. I know you've changed your name, but still, I remember you all the way from the very beginning as Praise Adonai. I'll try and remember the name change, but I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you so much for the support. Once again, I want to restate that a lot of people don't know that by calling up a congressman and letting them know what you think, it actually makes a huge difference, especially if a large amount of people from their district call them up and say that, because not a lot of people take the effort to call up their congressional office and tell them about their opinions. So they'll start to think that their constituents, by and large, want that particular thing, which is more support for Ukraine, and then they'll go into Congress and start advocating that. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from another channel legend, Kaltenberg, who says, Greetings, Team Enforcer, and greetings to you as well, Kaltenberg, and welcome back.
And greetings, Kaltenberg. Of course, we had a great break on Monday. It was wonderful. It was nice because I got to sit down and just enjoy my free time for the most part, which was nice. I rarely ever do that. But I thank you so much for the support, of course, and also thank you for welcoming us back. And also, I hope you've had a fun time watching the stream so far, and I hope that the news has been good and informative as well. And so with that, thank you once again, Kaltenberg, and we're going to move on to the final question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and Northern Donbass news.
And the final question of the segment goes to Sylvester the Cat, who is another channel legend who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Hello, Matt and Enforcer. When the U.S. sent the ammunition for the M777s, did they also send proximity and air burst fuses with them, or just ground burst? Leaf Spring Tanker."
Well, I thank you so much for the support. Also cool to hear we have a tanker in here. And to answer that question, I'm not exactly sure. I do know that they apparently got a small amount of Excalibur rounds. They also got, of course, the normal, I guess you could say, explode on impact kind of artillery shells. But I never heard anything in particular about them getting airburst rounds or anything like that. The only time I've heard about Ukraine getting any kind of airburst rounds was when the French provided 150mm airburst rounds for the Caesar SPG. And so beyond that, I don't think they've gotten any, I guess you could say, airburst rounds from the U.S. I think by and large, they're coming from the French. And I believe that the Caesar SPG and the M777 use the exact same 155mm caliber. And so I believe that those rounds may be interchangeable with the M777, and so they may be usable with them, but I never heard about the U.S. sending any over. And so I hope that answers the question. And of course, I thank you once again so much for the support. And with that, we're going to start moving on into the northern Kharkiv area and the northern Donbass. And if you have sent in a super chat, do not fret and do not worry. We do answer every single one of them by the end of the night. And also to a lot of new viewers who may be wondering, do we answer live chat questions? We do. We answer a couple of them at the end of the stream. And so make sure to @Enforcer or @EnforcerMatt to try and get your question seen. And once it's seen, Matthew usually throws them down on a list, and then we pick out the best ones that we can find, and we try and answer those at the end of the stream. And so with that, we're now going to start moving on into the Kharkiv area, and we're going to cover the Kharkiv news and the northern Donbass news. Starting off in Belgorod, we've once again gotten another video of an Iskander being launched towards Ukraine. We can see the Iskander being prepared to fire. We can now see the Iskander firing. And that missile, of course, is most likely heading for a Ukrainian city, and it's going to hit a residential building. That's almost the way this goes every single time, and I hope that that isn't the case and the Ukrainians can manage to shoot it down before it makes it to the city. Well, whichever city it's going for. We're now going to move into the northern Kharkiv area, where we've actually gotten a little bit of news, more so than normal. Starting off on day 110, we can actually see that the Ukrainians managed to pinpoint the Russian headquarters in this area and destroy it. Here we can see the building that they're using as their headquarters, and we can see a drone surveying the area and trying to, I guess you could say, call in the artillery coordinates for the artillery to then finish off the area. We can see an MTLB. They actually marked up a couple of things here. Samaskobana Technica. So there's some kind of a little technical in here. We can see an MTLB here. Then we can see a Z-Opto. I don't know what the Z-Opto is, but we can see that there's a technical, an MTLB, and some other kind of vehicle there. We can now see the artillery fire raining down on this headquarters section. And we see that the artillery continues to pour in. Of course, Ukrainian artillery is incredibly accurate. And we can see in this video, it definitely is, as it's hitting the exact same tree line that we just saw the drone fly over. We can now see multiple Russian vehicles in that tree line burning. And we can also see a Russian vehicle further out there in the field, right there. More artillery is landing in the tree line. Once again, it looks like it may have been a direct hit. Now we can see them label something else. Let me try and read it. Nishini Sklad BK. Unfortunately, I don't know what that means. We can now see another MTLB right here. It appears to have been destroyed in the artillery barrage, and we can see a BT. Again, not sure what the BT is. We can see a KAMAS there that's been destroyed. I mean, you see that headquarters division was destroyed. Of course, great to see. That's one other important side of warfare that kind of occurs in the background is logistics and communications. And headquarters are always involved heavily in the communication aspect of a war. And so destroying this headquarters unit is pretty much destroying the communication hub that a lot of Russian units are having to coordinate their efforts through and receive their orders from. And so by doing this, the Ukrainians are hindering Russian efforts on that part of the front line, and it may be harder for them to, I guess you could say, coordinate offensive actions or even defensive actions as they're pushed back if a counteroffensive does occur in that area. So with that, we're now going to move on into the next bit of news from the Kharkiv pocket, where we can see here on today, 111, the 40th Brigade hit a couple of targets with their artillery. Actually, correction, apparently this is the same video duplicated twice, and apparently I didn't catch that when I put them up. So actually, the same video happened twice in the same area in Kharkiv. And so, of course, great to see that headquarters unit was taken out, and of course, credit goes to the 40th Brigade, whose artillery did conduct that strike and did manage to wipe it out. We haven't gotten any more news from the northern Kharkiv salient. It's largely seemed to become static as the Ukrainians don't want to expend the manpower nor the resources to finally push the Russians out of this entire area. There's nothing really left that's strategically important for the Ukrainians to take, and so that's most likely the reason that they are no longer pushing an offensive. And we have also seen the Russians commit no offensive activities either, as their logistical forces in this area are of course incredibly weak, and trying to conduct a counterattack or an offensive in this area would incur massive losses of manpower, equipment, and supplies that the Russians no longer have the ability to, I guess you could say, waste. With that, we're now going to start moving further down the front line. We have, of course, gotten no news from the Chuhuv area or the Balaklia area. We've gotten no news from the Izium area, which is, of course, indicative that the Russian front lines have had to stall because there's just no way for them to supply all of their forces and to continue on any of these offensives that they were doing at the very beginning of the war. With that in mind, we're now going to move down to Lehman, which has also fallen silent as well, and is also furthering my claim that the Russians are running out of the logistical ability to carry on much of anything. And considering that the two prongs, I guess you could say western and eastern prongs of this Severodonetsk offensive have completely puttered out, and we don't even see them conducting any more offensive actions, that lets us know that those units as well have largely been depleted of their supplies and are no longer combat worthy. And so all of the combat worthy, I guess you could say, units and all of the Ukrainian theater are now left within Severodonetsk only. So moving on into the Lehman area, we can actually see that the 79th Brigade of the Ukrainian forces destroyed some Russian special equipment here in the area of Yampol today. Here we can see a Ukrainian drone looking down at a road, and we can see a vehicle there. We can now see it being hit by artillery, and then the video goes into a slideshow. That artillery was so powerful, it knocked the frame rate out of this video. Let's go back and see if we can get it to run right. So you can now see the artillery land near this vehicle. And it's some kind of a special equipment vehicle. I can't tell you exactly what kind, but it looks like it may be used for bridge laying or some kind of a tank repair. But you now see the vehicle on fire and burning. And so you can see that the special repair operation, or whatever that special vehicle was going to be used for, has largely fallen flat on its face. With that, we're now going to be moving out of that area. There's nothing really to report there. The front line, of course, has fallen stagnant. And we're now going to move into the Severodonetsk area. Starting off on the outskirts of Severodonetsk, we can actually see an M777 hitting Russian forces in the area. The title was actually incorrect. I made sure to look at it because I was like, what is this? But I actually found out that these were M777s that were firing at 3 Russian grads and managed to wipe out all 3 of them. We can now see the grads burning. We can also see the video has been heavily stabilized. but the Ukrainians managed to take out 3 grads with the M777s. That tells you how much of a range the M777s have to be committing counter battery fire against an MLRS, and also the accuracy of them for them to be able to knock out all 3. It's good to see that the M777s are being put to good use. That's always something that a lot of people have questions about whenever they're watching these streams or looking at the news in particular, is how well is Western equipment actually operating once it arrives in Ukraine. And in the M777's perspective, it's been incredibly well, and we haven't seen any information to contradict that. So very good to see, and I hope that the M777s continue to be used as good throughout the rest of the war. We're now going to move into Severodonetsk, where we've seen that pitched fighting has still been occurring over the past 48 hours in the city, but neither side has actually made any progress. Starting off on day 110, we can actually see a video from the Luhansk People's Republic of their forces fighting within the city. So here's a video of that.
Бои за Северодонецк продолжаются. Украинские нацисты, засевшие в промзоне города, постепенно сдают свои позиции и отступают. Прикрывает бегство карателей украинская артиллерия, беспощадно нанося удары уже по освобожденной жилой части города.
Ну, обстановка, вы сами видели, попали под нее только что. Так каждый день практически. Напряженная. Слышно сейчас в данный момент и стрелкотню, а вообще крупнокалиберные. Бьют минометы, плюс танк работает, и плюс со стороны Лисичанска работают дорады периодически.
Подразделения народной милиции и военнослужащие полка спецназа «Ахмат» планомерно выбивают противника из промзоны. Работать приходится аккуратно, так как на заводе находятся резервуары с химикатами, повреждение которых может оказаться фатальным.
Если аммиак не вышел там, может и слили, но в трубах же все равно производство, может отравление будет большое. Если, нарушат они эти цистерны, и не только ж военные, а и гражданские люди ж пострадают.
Оборона украинских боевиков рассыпается. Противник под натиском подразделений народной милиции и чеченского спецназа оставляет свои позиции и отступает в Лисичанск, чтобы там встретить свой бесславный конец.
And that is the end of the video, but we can see here, of course, the Luhansk Republic is trying to put a little bit of a spin on it, and they're trying to make it look like they're winning in the city. The truth is that neither side is winning right now. The Ukrainians are pushing back as hard as they can against the Russians, and the Russians are not falling back. On the other hand, the Russians are also trying to exert as much pressure on the Ukrainians and push them out of the city, but they've failed at that so far as well. And so the city, of course, has fallen stagnant, while the fighting is incredibly intense. This could change any day. Either side could manage to pull, I guess you could say, an advantage over the other and manage to push them out. But so far, that hasn't occurred in almost a week and a half, and I don't believe it's going to be happening anytime soon. Moving on to the next bit of day 110 news from the city, we can once again see another video showing the heavy fighting inside of Severodonetsk. Here's that video. Also, I'm going to have to mute it because it does have copyrighted music. But we see Ukrainian soldiers running around this factory building, it seems, and firing at the Russians. We can also see a poor guy back there trip over some kind of a rubble. And then we can see him aiming the RPG out the window. And then firing it. You now see that the RPG is on its way. And we can see that the fighting, of course, in all of these videos is very intense. We can also see that a lot of Ukrainians were pretty smart and thought, wow, that RPG could really screw up. And then they all ran around the room to make sure that they were all right, except for the man who was going to help out the guy shooting the RPG. So you can see from those videos alone that the fighting was heavy and fierce on day 110. And on day 111, we can see that it was no less fierce. We can see the Georgian Legion actually clearing out buildings today. Of course, I'm going to have to mute this video. And the Foreign Legion in general, the entirety of the Foreign Legion, every single nation that composes it, has been based in Kharkiv or Severodonetsk. And so a large portion of the Ukrainian forces within the city are actually foreign members of the Ukrainian military, I guess you could say. Some of them from the United States, some of them from Georgia, Britain, Brazil, and a whole bunch of other countries. And when you see the Georgians, who have been doing a large amount of firefighting throughout the entirety of the war, clearing buildings here in this video. We can now see them moving from building to building, garage to garage, clearing out every single room and every single crawl space that they can find. And that is the end of the video, but we do see a lot of proficiency in the Georgian forces and how they're clearing buildings, which does show the high level of training that a lot of foreign volunteers do possess, because a large amount of them are actually war veterans. With that, we're now going to move on to our last bit of news from Severodonetsk itself, where we can actually see a Ukrainian soldier squad, I guess you could say, evacuating people under fire in the city as of today. There are still around 10,000 people left within the city of Severodonetsk, although it originally had a population of around 110,000, and we can still see that the Ukrainians take the time and the effort to try and get these people to leave the city as well. We can hear the artillery raining in, and we can see the soldiers on the move through the streets in the city. We now see the civilians getting out, also with their dogs, it appears. We hear artillery fire in the distance. We now see the soldiers loading the folks into a police car.
Давай, быстрее в машину полицейскую. Давай, быстрее сюда. Ваша задача будет скомпоновать сейчас еще людей. Мы приедем, сейчас заберем.
Она добежит.
And we can now see them going to the next group and trying to get them out as well. And you can also see an older lady with a walker there. And it gives you the idea of the people who were left behind in the city. They largely seem like older people who may have felt like they would have been a hindrance trying to get out, or they felt like they didn't really want to get out. And we can still see the Ukrainians making the effort to try and save every single one of them from even being in the line of fire of the Russians. And you have to give a huge amount of credit to these soldiers, because you know it takes a lot of patience on their part, considering how stressed out they are trying to defend the city, to go from house to house and make sure that all the civilians that can possibly be evacuated can leave. Another important thing to note that will add to the stress of the Ukrainian soldiers is that the final bridge that was standing over the Severodonetsk River that led to Severodonetsk has been destroyed today. And so, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, supplies and also soldiers that are trying to get to the other side, to the city of Severodonetsk, will most likely have to cross the river by boat, or they will have to build some kind of a Bailey bridge or some kind of pontoon bridge to then try and get forces over to the other side, and supplies as well. So that's going to add a lot of pressure onto the Ukrainian defenders in this area, but at the same time, there's no reason to fear. The Ukrainians are not entirely cut off, and they're not going to be killed off like they were in the Azovstal. And there's some very good reasons to make that assessment and make it pretty clear. First off, Lysychansk is about 400 to 500 feet higher than the city of Severodonetsk. The entirety of the western side of the Severodonetsk River is actually a large ridge. And so, for the Russians to be able to destroy the Ukrainians crossing, they would have to chase them down with the infantry or try and bombard them with artillery, and the Ukrainian forces and their artillery are up on a bluff, and so they can actually fire at the Russians for a further distance than the Russians can fire at them. And so if the Ukrainians do have to organize a retreat out of the city, they will be relatively safe compared to, I guess you could say, different situations that have occurred during the war, like it at the Azovstal, where they were completely cut off from Ukrainian forces and there was no way out. So with that, we're now going to move down to the next bit of news in Lysychansk, where we can actually see heavy artillery fire in Lysychansk as well from the Russian forces. And we can see that journalists that were in the city were having to endure this fire along with everyone else. We see the reporters on the ground, trying to take cover. We see an armored car near them, apparently. And we now see what appears to be either a German journalist or a volunteer within this group. I'm assuming a volunteer because this guy's got a yellow arm patch on.
Listen to me, and if I say something,
It's our main military.
100%, okay?
You hear that? That shell practically landed right on top of him. You hear it by the sound alone. Let's go back and listen to that.
100%, okay?
Golly, I would hate to be that close to an explosion, not for the fact of the shrapnel, but if it's that close to you, I feel like it's going to bust your eardrums probably. And so, if they didn't get injured, they're going to have to be suffering tinnitus for days probably because of how loud and how close.
Окей. Давайте быстро. Коля, веди. Куда нам?
And that's the end of the video, but you can see that Ukrainian forces, even on the other side of the river in Lysychansk, are having a pretty hard time with artillery as well. And the Russians, of course, are indiscriminately bombarding the city, regardless of whether civilians are in them or not, trying to uproot the Ukrainians. Hopefully the Ukrainians can hold both cities. Right now we know the Lysychansk area is much more secure than the Severodonetsk area. While there's been a small amount of fighting on the P-66 highway leading to the city, the Russians haven't been conducting as hard of a push towards Lysychansk as they've been trying to conduct straight through Severodonetsk. So with that, we're now going to move out of the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area, and we're now going to move into Luhansk, where I'm going to show y'all something really sickening. Apparently a Novorossiya, which means New Russia, which is what both of these breakaway countries are kind of called. If you call them under an umbrella term, they're called Novorossiya. We can see a guy that's representing them here in this interview talking about killing foreign volunteers to send a message to their home countries that their volunteers aren't welcome in Ukraine. I'm just going to let y'all watch this. There is a speech-to-text translation at the bottom, and I'm just going to let y'all listen to this because it's honestly insane.
Как вы думаете, кто скорее потеряет боевой дух при поражениях? Та армия, у которой мощная пропаганда, серьезная дисциплина вплоть до смертной казни в тылу, или та армия, у которой можно просто порвать контракт, просто порвать военный билет и убежать в тыл? Как полагаете? Ну, я еще хочу задать, кстати, в связи с этим, ответить на вопрос по вот этим осужденным наемникам. У нас, когда двум британцам и одному марокканцам, я ставлю 9-1, что их либо помилуют, либо приговорят, то есть снизят им срок и в итоге обменяют. Ставлю 9-1. Если я ошибусь, я вот прям отдельный пост опубликую о том, что насколько положительное явление, поскольку их просто обязательно надо казнить. Просто обязательно. Потому что казнь этих трех мерзавцев...
I just noticed, I was just looking at the stream on my control page, and I was just watching as well, that y'all can't see the speech-to-text translation. So I'm going to go back and start it from the beginning and read it out so that way y'all can see it as well.
Как вы думаете?
Who do you think is more likely to lose morale when defeated? An army with strong propaganda, serious discipline, and even the death penalty? Or an army where you can just tear up your contract, just tear up your military ID, and flee to the rear? What do you think? Well, I also want to answer the question about these convicted mercenaries. The Brits? Yes, 2 Brits and 1 Moroccan. I'm betting 9-1 that they'll either be pardoned or leave, air sentences reduced, and eventually be exchanged. 9-1. If I'm wrong, I'll publish and separate post about how positive it would be if they were executed, because they just have to be executed. They just have to be. Because the execution of these 3 scoundrels, enemies who voluntarily came on safari to shoot the Russians, will save hundreds at least, and maybe thousands of lives of Russian soldiers. Now and in the future. Because a considerable part of those who are going on safari in England, Morocco, Spain, Finland, Germany will scratch their heads and say, what the hell? Yes, if they won't shoot in exchange, these people will smile and say, on the contrary, in extreme case, we will surrender and nothing will happen to us. Now it is really a kind of Rubicon. If these people are executed, and they should be executed, it will be a step towards victory. If these people are not executed, it will be a big step towards the defeat. Do you agree, Vladimir Vasilyevich? And then the guy over there in the military uniform in the LPR says, absolutely. That gives you an idea of how sick these I guess you could say, government officials and propagandists in the DPR and LPR are, is that they are literally advocating for the death penalty for these soldiers. And the whole entire point of it, according to them, is to send a message to the rest of, I guess you could say, the foreign volunteers that if they stay in Ukraine and fight for them, they will kill them practically on sight. As soon as they're captured, if they surrender, it's a guaranteed death penalty. And that's sickening to hear from them, because the Ukrainians never do that. If they ever capture a Russian prisoner, they may put them on trial and put them in prison for life, but you never see them advocating for the death penalty. Yet Russians and pro-Russian forces will advocate for death nearly every single time they're able to catch a Ukrainian. And it's honestly amazing to me to see that the Ukrainians still exert some level of sympathy on Russian prisoners of war after time and time again, every single time a Ukrainian soldier is captured, the Russians immediately want to kill them. So with that, we're going to now be moving back towards the front lines themselves, and we're going to go and cover our last 2 bits of Northern Donbass news before we move on to our next 3-question segment. Here in this video, we can actually see one of the Mi-17s that the Americans provided flying over the field. According to the caption, this is one of the first times on film that we've seen an American Mi-17 arrive to the front and actually be used. We can see it firing off its rockets, and now it's hitting the deck. We can now see a second Mi-17, supposedly another American Mi-17, now firing off its rockets as well, popping its flares, and now it's going down to hit the deck as well. So, pretty interesting video, and it's interesting to think that the Americans had Mi-17s to send over in the first place because they're Russian-made, and so my question is, how in the world do the Americans have that many of them to send over? I would like to actually get the story behind that, but of course, great to see that they actually sent over something that's compatible with the Russian, well, not the Russian, the Ukrainian forces, and something that they really didn't have to train to be able to operate. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news that's actually from the Popasna Finger, where we can actually see the Ukrainian 80th Brigade using Stugnas against the Russian forces and inflicting a couple of casualties on them. So here's the video. We can now see the Stugna is on its way. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any audio. But we can see that the missile is flying towards its target. The crosshair has been adjusted, and it hit dead on, destroying that vehicle. We can see it burning up there at the end, and now we go to another bit of film where they're lining up another Russian vehicle to be hit. This one appears to be stationary in the field. The Stugna is now fired, and it's on the way. We now see it hit that vehicle as well, knocking out a second Russian vehicle with one Stugna, the exact same Stugna in the exact same place. We now see them showing a little bit of footage of one of the vehicles burning, and it appeared from a glance that it may have been a BMP-2. So great to see, of course, once again, that the Ukrainians are knocking out more Russian units. Every single Russian unit knocked out is one less Russian unit and one less Russian soldier that could commit war crimes against the people of Ukraine, and also continue on these nasty offensives that have been tying up the Ukrainians into this war for almost 4 months. With that, to talk about in depth a little bit of the situation here around Severodonetsk, of course, both the western and eastern flanks have completely ground to a halt, and the Russians haven't been able to manage to take more ground in these areas, which were crucial to an encirclement of Severodonetsk, which would have eventually led to its collapse. Right now, the supplies are flowing into Severodonetsk and Lysychansk nearly unfettered, although the bridges across the Severodonetsk River have been destroyed. Hopefully the Ukrainians can hold on to this area. It looks like they will, and it looks like this Russian offensive, after going on for about a month at this point, may finally be petering out because, of course, the flanks have completely ground to a halt, and the only thing left that's still running in this offensive is the attack on Severodonetsk itself. So, of course, we'll be watching the news and trying to see if there's any trends to see if this will be the case or not, but so far, it is pretty interesting to see. And here's something else I'd like to address. I see a lot of people, and I'm even seeing this in my Discord server, and I don't know where this is coming from, of people asking, how did the Ukrainians lose Severodonetsk? And they haven't. I don't know where people are coming up with that information, because every single day we get videos showing the Ukrainians fighting in Severodonetsk, and the Russians fighting there as well. And so I don't know who's coming up with that information, and I've also heard some people trying to propagate the claim that the Russians control the entirety of the Donbass, and that's not true either, because when you look at the map, almost half of the Donetsk Republic, or the Donetsk Oblast, is controlled by the Ukrainians, and about 5% of the Luhansk Oblast is still controlled by the Ukrainians as well. And so I just want to dispel those myths. If you see anyone trying to propagate those, assume that they're trying to spin a narrative that's to demoralize pro-Ukrainian supporters, because there's no truth to them whatsoever. And so with that, we're now going to start moving on towards the southern Donbass and the rest of the news, which is mostly around the Kherson area. But before we do, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So first up from the chat, we have a $33 donation from John Boyer, another one of our channel regulars, who says, will the Russians be spread too thin to effectively hold the territory they have taken in the long run? Encore Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, Slava President Zelensky, and Slava Ukraine, the fearless Ukrainian people rock.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, Praise Ad9. I also thank you for sending out the kind words to the Ukrainians. I'm sure
that was actually John Boyer.
What? Oh my lord, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the support, John. I'm sorry that I called you Praise Ad9. For some reason, for some reason, coffee doesn't work anymore. I'm just gonna be honest. I try and drink as much as I can. It's just not doing much for me. So sorry about that. But I do thank you very much for the support, John Boyer, and also I thank you so much for the nice words that you sent out to the to Ukraine. Because the Ukrainians who do watch this stream highly appreciate it, of course, and everyone always appreciates a huge amount of support going towards Ukraine. Now, to answer that question, are they very spread out? In terms of manpower, no. In terms of supplies, yes. The Russians, it appears, are only able to supply a single area of the front, which is the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and also the Severodonetsk front. The only reason I say that the DPR and LPR are somewhat decently supplied is because that's the area that we see large artillery battles being engaged in by, I guess you could say, both sides to a high amount. So that does show that they are being supplied to some degree. On the other hand, we know that elsewhere across the front lines, there are almost no supplies being given to those units, and if there is any supplies, they have to be kept at almost a completely stationary position, eating up no resources whatsoever for them to technically be well supplied. So in that regard, supply-wise, they are being overextended, but in terms of the actual manpower across the entire front lines, it's actually pretty balanced. They have about the same amount of forces in the Severodonetsk area as they have in, say, the Chuhuiv area or the Kherson area. But it's all really just a matter of supply, and that's, of course, what counts. If you have 100 soldiers on both sides, and one side's able to feed 90 of them, and the other side's only able to feed 10 of them, then that means one side actually has about 90 soldiers that they can field, and the other side only has about 10. Because, you know, on both sides, the soldiers that aren't going to be fed are going to starve out and die, and so then you're just left with whatever you're able to supply. So, in that regard, I do think that they have overextended a pretty decent bit. And once again, John, I thank you so much for the support. I'm sorry I got you mixed up with Praise Adonai. He was here earlier, of course, and for some reason I got stuck with his name in my head and thought for some reason you were Praise Adonai, but I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question to the best of my abilities. Once again, take it with a grain of salt, because of course, while I do give my statements, which are kind of opinions in their way, they are just kind of like my analysis and based off of what I know. And while I do say them because I believe they are correct, I could be wrong. So always make sure to double check what I say with your own information and own sources, and make sure that it is on par. But once again, I thank you so much for supporting the channel. It helps us out a huge deal, and it always helps us to keep running, which is of course the most important thing here, because if we aren't able to run, we aren't able to make the news. So I thank you so much for supporting us and making sure that we're able to keep on doing this news the way we are, and it means a whole load to us, John. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $25 donation from Tim Price, who says, Putin greater than Putin the Great, greater than Great Big Peter.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and I would agree. I don't know what Great Big Peter means. I think I know what you mean. But yeah, I would say that would be about the proper order if I had to put them all into the order, and if I'm thinking what you're thinking. I think that may be true. So I thank you very much for the support. I don't really know where to go with it. But of course, I thank you very much for the support. It does help us to run this channel, and it's always greatly appreciated. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and I thank you so much once again for the support.
And the last one of this segment goes to BG Willia 21207, who puts in a $20 donation and says, if you were to describe this war Please describe it, the Ukraine-Russian war, as though it were a bar fight.
That's going to be tough for me to do, but I will try. So, pretty much, there's like two motorcycle gangs in this bar. One of them is called NATO. Well, this is going to sound really cheesy saying it like this, but one of them's called NATO. One of them's called the CSTO. You know what? We'll call NATO Hell's Angels. Well, no, we're not, because that's going to start a gang war. But anyways, so the Ukrainian guy in this bar, he's new here. He's only been here for a short while compared to the other two groups. And he wants to kind of, I guess you could say, well, he doesn't really want to join either side at the moment. He's kind of neutral. But the Russians are trying to, of course, exert some influence on him. So they kind of pull a little bit of sway because he's closer to their side of the bar. And so the Ukrainian guy, he kind of sides with them a little bit, but not really. He kind of still stays in the middle of the bar. But eventually, his girlfriend comes in, which both of them are pretty much one and the same. And she has a huge problem with him kind of allying with the Russians even a little bit. And she wants him to ally with the NATO motorcycle gang on the other side of the bar. And so she gets in a huge row. She throws a beer bottle at him. And so he decides that it would be a good idea to side with NATO so that way he can appease his girlfriend. So he starts to go towards the NATO direction, but the Russians are scared because this guy's like a good quick draw and whatnot, that he's going to use one of his hands, like that shoots his gun, against them eventually. And so what they do preemptively is before he can get up and actually go over there to the NATO gang, is that they grab his hand and they just chop the whole thing off. And that's pretty much Crimea. And so they keep the hand for a pretty good bit. Now Ukraine is pissed. They only have one hand left. It's not even their best shooting hand, but that's all they have. And they still, now to see that the Russians have kind of backstabbed them like that, the CSTO, they really want to join that NATO biker gang. And so finally, they suck it up and they go over to NATO and they're like, hey, I want to join y'all. And then the CSTO gang says you cannot join their group or else we're going to like beat you to death and we'll beat all the NATO members to death as well. And so the NATO members, not really wanting to get into a fight right now, they back off. And then the CSTO gang is pretty much left to beat up Ukraine on its own, while I guess you could say the NATO gang is kind of just buying the Ukrainian a drink every once in a while or giving him like a pool cue to beat the Russians with, the CSTO with. So if I had to explain it as a bar fight, I guess that would be the best way. Also, sorry, Will Riley, I just saw you got here and you're like, what is this? And I'm trying to answer a question here. But with that, I hope that explained it as a bar fight as best as possible. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that did answer the question. And with that, I think that was the last question of our segment, wasn't it, Matthew?
I believe so.
All right. And with that, I hope that answered everyone's questions. If you have sent in a super chat, do not worry. We do answer every single one of them by the end of the night. And also, I would like to say once again to go check out our merch. We are running a limited edition merch run. It will only be available until Saturday at 12 o'clock at night. And so make sure to go check it out. It does support the channel. And the merch we designed is pretty neat. So with that, we're now going to start moving into the rest of the news for the night, starting off near Donetsk itself. Near the front lines, we actually got to see a video of a day in the life of a Ukrainian medic. So I'm going to let y'all see this video. Of course, has a speech-to-text translation at the bottom, a courtesy of Radio Free Europe, which does a whole bunch of good work on providing information on the ground. But anyways, here's the video.
Головой вперед. Так. Стой, нога. Ай, блядь, поднимись. Поднять, ну я ж не можу. Що не можу? Давай встану. Все, поїхали. Середній, лежачий, осколковий на виліт, нижче коліна. Висуваюсь на трубу, як мене прийняли прийом. Зараз подивимось. Тут в мене два укола, вони мені один якийсь антишок сказали, вкололи. Дайте мені, дезінфекційну, бо я не розбив. Нас просто чекають. Доводиться іноді під обстрілами забирати хлопців. Ну, думаєш, звичайно, що коли поряд десь якісь розриви, прильоти, само собою намагаєшся тримати себе в руках. Страшно. Але в той же самий час ти розумієш, що якщо не ти, то хто тоді допоможе?
Так, тепер так само. По пів оберта. Зараз достаю? Так, по пів оберта. Не паску, пів оберта. Пішов. Плюс пів оберта. Ще пів оберта. Ще пів оберта. Ще пів оберта. Ще пів оберта. Плюс. Так легше? Отак і працюємо.
Ви ж самі бачите,
Я за то. Ми зараз поставимо жгут, все буде добре. Пішли.
Не довести пораненого. Це найстрашніше. І не бачити більше, як твої друзі гинуть.
Що там, нічого не їде?
День проходить по-різному. Постійно знаходишся в очікуванні. Десь так просто піти, відлучитись, щоб нічого не робити, такого не буває. Буває таке, поранення ж не завжди. Так само вони є різні, ті поранення. Іноді можна просидіти півдня, день, нічого не робити. А іноді можна провести в дорозі на евакуації, скажімо так, реально півдня.
Піднімаємо. Обережно. Хто, де? Розмова про симпатичне?
У нас виборів нічого немає, нас чекають. Криють і криють.
О, з Богом!
Of course, once again, courtesy to Radio Free Europe, who's been providing incredible news during the course of this war. And in that video, we could see this poor Ukrainian medic who is pretty much the subject of the video. You can tell he has a massive heart because he really feels for the other Ukrainians that are getting wounded and sometimes killed, and him evacuating. I mean, you can see that he's almost on the verge of tears during the entire interview and as he's describing his life experiences. And it's unfortunate to think that these poor soldiers are going through this, but of course they're completely, I guess you could say, into the war. That's kind of a poor way to describe it, but they're into what they're defending, which is their homeland. And so regardless of how much sadness and suffering they have to go through, they go through it to pretty much protect the rest of the Western world and their country as well. And I think it's honestly something impressive, and I want to give a huge thank you, and I hope everyone in the chat gives that medic a huge thank you for continuing to do what he does and help to evacuate those poor wounded Ukrainian soldiers that have been on the front lines fighting for this country for an incredibly long time. So with that, we're now going to move further down the front lines, and we're now going to move into the city of Donetsk on day 110. We actually saw something interesting again. This is the second time it's occurred, and now we can actually confirm that this is something that the Ukrainians are doing. Apparently, the Ukrainians are directing MLRS fire into the suburbs of Donetsk. This is the Kyievsky district of the city, and they're trying to hit Russian forces within these populated residential areas, maybe hitting civilians. Which, while I am pro-Ukrainian, hitting civilians is always a war crime. But here's the video. We can see the first rockets landing in the suburb and hitting around what may appear to be a slag heap. And it looks like there may also be some residential buildings in there as well. And that's the end of the video, but you could see MLRS barrages landing in the city. It is a little understandable, though, because the area of the city that they're hitting is somewhere out here, right on the outskirts, which is literally where the Russian front lines are. And you can actually see the Donetsk airport, which has been a massive battlefield for years at this point, right there. And so, pretty much to hit the Russian forces, they actually have to aim these artillery barrages into the suburbs here, because that's where the Russian front line is. Hopefully, there are no civilians there, and if there are, that's of course unfortunate, and it is a little bit of a war crime, but we'll just have to look into that information and see if that does remain true here in the future. We're now going to move deeper into Donetsk city, where we can actually see wives of DPR soldiers complaining about their husbands being sent off to war. Some of them aren't even medically fit, they didn't even swear an oath, and now they are being sent to the front lines to fight. Here's the video of these women pretty much lodging their formal complaint directly to Putin.
Здравствуйте, это жены мобилизованных, 121 полк, 2 батальон. Сейчас на данный момент мы не знаем, уже 4 месяца, где находятся наши мужья. Мы 24 февраля они были включены в личный состав воинской части города Комсомольск 08801, из которой благополучно отбыли в неизвестном направлении. На данный момент мы не знаем, на 4 месяца не было ни выплат, никаких увольнительных. По нашей информации, 6 числа, 6 июня, должны были их вернуть в эту часть. Они сюда не доехали. Из их полка, 121-го полка, доехала только 1/4 рота. Где находятся остальные роты, нам отказывается воинская часть сообщать. Мы обращались по всем инстанциям, мы звонили всем. Везде нам не дают никакой информации.
I'm going to stop the video right here because unfortunately we don't have a speech-to-text translation, but you can see this woman lodging her complaint and a whole bunch of wives surrounding her that support what she's saying. Another thing I would like to return to here, and I've seen a lot of people doing this, and in the object of fairness, I'm going to address this and say why I'm saying that's potential war crimes. I've seen some people saying if there are soldiers in that area, and that area is being bombarded by the Ukrainians and civilians are killed because of that, that's not a war crime. But that's what the Russians have been saying for 3.5 months, nearly 4 months at this point, and I've been saying that that's a war crime, and it's because it is. Killing civilians in any circumstances is a war crime. And so, I'm not going to sit here just because I'm pro-Ukrainian and draw a double standard where I can look at one video of the Russians doing that exact same thing and say that's a war crime, and when the Ukrainians do it, say it's not a war crime. Both of them are war crimes. Killing a civilian in any regard is a war crime. Like, that would be like saying dropping white phosphorus is okay as long as there's a soldier somewhere in the area, and then you're justifying what the Russians are doing, and then what we've been saying about the Russians for months on end loses all of its merit, because then we just accept it when the Ukrainians do it. And so that's why I said that. Hope y'all can understand, because while I am pro-Ukrainian, I'm not hypocritical. I don't sit there and say that the Russians are terrible for doing one thing, and then when we see the Ukrainians doing the exact same thing, go, they're totally fine. So with that, that's the Donetsk region. That's what we're seeing so far. Of course, the front's in a stalemate. We haven't seen any kind of actions really developing there by and large over the past few months, and that's because it is one of the most heavily fortified areas of the front line. We haven't seen the Russians been able to push out in any direction, and it appears that their offensive actions have completely stalled, and they're no longer pushing an offensive. We did see kind of like a three-pronged offensive, one prong heading through Marinka, one prong heading through Pisky, and another one heading through Avdiivka, and we've seen all three of them fail, and it appears that they're no longer trying anymore. So with that, we're now going to move on down past the Donetsk area and past the rest of the southern front. We have not gotten any news from here either. It seems that both sides, of course, are falling static, and no ground has been made by either side at all during these past 48 hours anywhere on the front line, which is always something to note because this is the first time ever in channel history where I cannot say that one side or the other has managed to make any ground. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the Kherson area where we've seen a large amount of activity unfolding, but no new ground made. But this does not mean that the Ukrainians are not bombarding the living daylights out of the Russians all over this area. Starting off in Novokakhovka, we can actually see a massive fire broke out. Whether it be an oil fire or an ammunition fire, I can't really tell you. The smoke is thick and black, which does give us a suggestion, an idea, I guess you could say, that it is some kind of an ammunition or most likely oil fire, but we can't really tell for certain. We see the fire burning in the distance.
Да, я с радостью сейчас, блядь, там.
And we now see a massive explosion erupt, which made me think, because I originally thought this may have been an oil fire, and then when that explosion occurred, I was thinking, well, maybe it's an ammunition fire. I can't really tell.
Ебать! Саш, зайди.
And that is the end of the video, and we can see right there that whatever the Ukrainians have hit, it's burning pretty profusely, and it appears to have caused a massive amount of damage, and hopefully it will stop the Russians from getting these vital supplies that they need to even try and hold the Ukrainians back at all on this front. Moving on to the next bit of news near Davydiv Brid, we can actually see a small Russian counterpush being destroyed. Apparently a small, I guess you could say, Russian column tried to push out against the Ukrainians, and we can see them being highlighted here. We can see it says BMP, Kazapiv, I think. And we can see it being hit by artillery. It doesn't really matter what the specific name is, but we can see it being blasted. So, of course, it got knocked out. And now we can see it through the drone's perspective as it pans around, and we can now see more artillery landing on the area and the BMP in the ditch being destroyed. We can now see what appears to be 2 of these BMPs on that tree line getting knocked out. Once again, great to see, and it is good to know that the Ukrainians are holding the ground that they have gained in this southern front. Moving on down towards the city of Kherson, we can actually see that the 28th has also destroyed a BMP-3 in this area today as well. In the footage here, we can see a John Deere combine harvester, which is actually pretty cool. I didn't know the Ukrainians had those. And we now see their artillery raining in right around this harvester. The BMP is in here somewhere, but I haven't seen it yet on film. So we're going to go back and take a look again. It's right there, actually. I can see it now. It's covered in some kind of a tarp. And now we can see the artillery coming down. So now I have a context of where it's supposed to be landing. We now see the artillery hitting dead on the BMP and destroying it. We can now see a second hit. And now we can see that the BMP is burning down there and is producing that thick black smoke, which lets us know that an oil fire has occurred and it's burning up for certain. We can see some ammunition flying off and a little bit of ammunition exploding inside of the tank as well. Well, the APC. And we see the BMP-3 continuing to explode in a very fiery fashion. And it looks like that BMP is going to be toasting for a pretty good while. With that, we're now going to move out of the area. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Kherson front because the rest of the news is not directly attached to it. The Ukrainians, of course, have made no advances here today. Neither have the Russians. It appears that the front has fallen into stalemate like the rest of the front lines across the country today. But that doesn't indicate that either side is getting the advantage right now. It just appears that by and large, fighting has stopped on the front lines as of the past 48 hours. For the larger extent, maybe because both sides are running into exhaustion in terms of their supplies. With that, we're now going to move off of the front lines, and we're now going to move towards the small village of Lupereve, which is right near the mouth of the Ba River. Here we can see an artillery duel occur in between the Ukrainians and the Russians on film.
Looks like self-propelled artillery and a troop carrier.
You hear the artillery exploding in the distance.
Я.
По селу б'ють. Куди посяти можна вас?
Світ.
Ми ж там. Да.
You hear the artillery still exploding in the background as the duel still unfolds.
If you listen closely, you can hear the inbound whistle.
And what's interesting is that this other guy out here is just tending to his garden while an artillery battle is unfolding just a mile away or so.
The seemingly peaceful Ukrainian countryside.
And so with that, it's actually a pretty interesting clip because you get two contradictory things in the same video. You get this very peaceful countryside, birds chirping, guy tending to his garden. It's a very pretty garden, actually. And then just in the distance, you can hear an artillery duel occurring in between both sides as artillery is firing into the distance and incoming fire is coming in and exploding around it. And it's just an interesting, I guess you could say, juxtaposition of the normal peaceful world and the world that they're living in right now with the war. And so actually very interesting to see, and hopefully the Ukrainian units that were firing from this village did manage to win this artillery duel and come out on top. With that, we're now going to move up to the Mykolaiv area, where we can actually see an old Soviet car hauling some cows. And when I say old Soviet, I feel like Bald and Bankrupt, if y'all have ever watched him. Look, there's an old Soviet Abkhazan shop or something like that. But anyways, here's this Lada pulling a whole bunch of cows in a trailer.
Make sure you get the ladder.
Pretty crazy, but pretty cool at the same time. So with that, we're now going to move out of the southern front. Well, actually, we're not. We have one thing left, and this is actually the biggest news I believe we had today, is that the Ukrainians managed to shoot down 3 cruise missiles that were fired from the Black Sea here on day 111, and so it's actually a pretty big success. We can actually see the rear of one of these cruise missiles stuck into the ground after it crashed, after being shot down, and the Ukrainians thwarted 3 cruise missile attacks on Ukrainian cities. Really impressive to think that the Ukrainian Air Force managed to do this, and I've got to say, huge respect for the Ukrainian Air Force that's been continuously fighting this war for 111 days and has never been knocked out of the fight yet. And so, real quick, before we move up to Kyiv, I see that everyone is talking a little bit in the chat, and I'm going to have to explain a little bit more my point, because I'm going to remain pretty adamant on this, because there's historical context for what I'm saying. When the Russians fire a cruise missile into Ukraine, and it hits a skyscraper like in Kyiv, that cruise missile was not aimed at that skyscraper. It was angled downwards on a path towards another building, and that skyscraper happened to be in the way. It hit the building, and it killed civilians. Immediately declared a war crime by me and everyone else at the time. The cruise missile's intent was to not hit that building. Let's make that clear. It was aiming for something behind it and hit that building. But that was a war crime. And I 100% believe that it was a war crime. Every single time we see a Russian cruise missile being flown into the country and targeting some city, it's targeting key infrastructure and military equipment within those cities. However, cruise missiles are not always accurate. Cruise missiles can miss their targets, surprisingly, believe it or not. And here's an example. In the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the United States aimed 4 cruise missiles at Saddam Hussein's mansion, hoping that he would be inside of it. Those 4 cruise missiles all missed their targets and happened to kill something like 70 civilians that were surrounding this mansion because all of them missed by a certain degree in one direction or the other. In my mind, that is a war crime. And it should be. Civilians were killed. regardless whether you're saying that was a military target or what, modern wars are supposed to be going in the direction where civilian casualties are mitigated to the point that they're almost non-existent. And so, in any regard, in any way, shape, or form where civilians are in the way and they're getting hit and killed, I consider that a war crime. And so whenever I look at something like the Russians bombarding a city like Kharkiv, which does have Ukrainian soldiers in it, especially at the beginning of the war, and they were hitting civilians as well and killing them, that's a war crime in my opinion. And so I've had this same standard and rule going on throughout the entire thing. It does not matter what the Russians are targeting. If it was a military target and they somehow missed and killed civilians, that is a war crime. And so whenever I look at, for example, this one instance we have today of an MLRS attack hitting Donetsk, and it's hitting a residential area that may have civilians in it and military targets as well, if they're missing the military targets and they're hitting civilians, I would consider that a war crime, because I'm using the exact same rules to base what I'm going off of here every single time. And so, while it does sound bad, it is what it is. That's one thing I've always said, is that when I analyze things on the ground, I do not pick a bias. I'm looking at it completely unbiased, and I'm giving my opinion on it. And so my opinion is that if any civilians are killed under any circumstances, even if there is a military target around, there are pinpoint munitions, like we've seen the Ukrainians use before, and we've seen the Russians use a few of them before, where they could hit those military targets without incurring any civilian casualties. So that's kind of my input on it. I know that there's a lot of people in the live chat right now trying to say that the Ukrainians were justified in that attack on a residential area. But I don't really see the merit there, because if we're saying that, then I need to go and backtrack about everything I've said about the Russians ever and say all of the Ukrainian civilians that have died, the tens of thousands of them, it was justified. And, because there were soldiers nearby and they were just unfortunate casualties of war. And I'm not going to do that. Those tens of thousands, if not nearly 100,000 civilians that are Ukrainian that have died in this war so far, have died by war crimes. And any civilians that die in any manner like that on either side are dying pretty much by war crimes, in my opinion. So I hope that kind of addresses why I'm saying that. If y'all want to disagree, feel free to disagree. This isn't the dead-ended discussion. Of course, everyone can have their own opinions, but that's mine. So with that, we're now going to move on up to Kyiv, where we've actually seen President Zelensky making a plea today for more firepower from the West. We've seen this plea multiple times, and it's never been as important now. It's more important now than it's ever been in context, considering what I discussed before earlier on in the stream about how the Russians are at a very weak point supply-wise, and if the Ukrainians just had a little bit of extra grease, elbow grease, I guess you could say, they can actually manage to push the Russians back sizably right now. And so we're going to go through this speech. It does have a speech-to-text translation of President Zelensky asking for more firepower.
Українці, українки, усі наші захисники і захисниці. Сьогодні нашій протиповітряній обороні вдалося підрізати крила російським ракетам. Частину ракет, які окупанти направили проти наших міст, вдалося збити. І це врятовані життя, це врятована інфраструктура. Але вдалося збити тільки частину. На жаль, є жертви, є руйнування. Сьогодні удар був по Львівській і Тернопільській областях. І ми знову і знову повторюємо нашим партнерам, що Україні потрібна сучасна протиракетна зброя. У нашої держави її поки немає на достатньому рівні, але саме у нашій державі і саме зараз найбільше в Європі потреба саме у такій зброї. Затягування з її наданням не може мати виправдань. Буду постійно наголошувати на цьому, говорячи з нашими партнерами. Перші запити на протиракетні системи ми зробили ще задовго до повномасштабного вторгнення. І цього тижня буде багато різних важливих переговорів, і не тільки з європейськими політиками, яким по силах надати Україні сучасні протиракетні системи. Навіть попри те, що сучасних ракет у Росії з кожним днем війни все менше, потреба України в таких системах зберігається. Бо і у Росії зберігається ще достатньо радянських типів ракет, які навіть ще небезпечніші. Вони у рази менш точні, а отже у рази більш загрожують саме цивільним об'єктам і звичайним житловим будинкам. Говорив сьогодні з прем'єр-міністром Канади Джастіном Трюдо. Звичайно, темою номер 1 була оборонна підтримка. Канада у ній серед лідерів. Подякував за те, що Канада стала і першою державою, яка перевела на український рахунок в Міжнародний валютний фонд спеціальну допомогу – близько $800 мільйонів. Також мав розмову з президентом Еквадору. привітав його з обранням Еквадору членом Ради безпеки ООН. Поінформував про актуальну ситуацію на полі бою і закликав посилювати тиск на Росію для закінчення цієї війни. І ця розмова з президентом Еквадору і вчорашня розмова з президентом Гватемали стали тільки початком нашої нової політики по відновленню до відносин з Латинської Америки. Попросив сьогодні головнокомандуюча Збройних сил України дуже уважно поставитись до повідомлень у засобах масової інформації, у соцмережах про те, що у частини наших бійців немає достатніх засобів індивідуального захисту. Доповіді, які я отримую, суттєво відрізняються від того, що обговорюється суспільством. Я очікую перевірки логістики в армії, перевірки того, що постачається, і того, як розподіляються засоби індивідуального захисту. На сьогодні усім, хто перебуває в зонах бойових дій, повинно вистачати усього необхідного для захисту. Держава забезпечує таке постачання. За минулу добу в битві на Донбасі кардинальних змін не відбулось. Найбільш жорстокі бої в Северодонецьку та в усіх містах і громадах поруч, як і раніше. Втрати, на жаль, втрати, і вони болісні. Але потрібно триматись. Це наша держава. Триматись саме там, на Донбасі, життєво необхідно. Чим більше втрат отримає ворог саме там, тим менше сил у них буде, щоб продовжувати агресію. Тому Донбаський напрямок ключовий для визначення того, хто буде домінувати найближчими тижнями. Болісні втрати маємо і на Харківщині, де російська армія пробує посилити свої позиції. Бої за цей напрямок тривають і треба ще боротись, жорстко битись за повну безпеку для Харкова та області. Продовжуємо тиснути на окупантів на півдні України. Ключова мета – звільнення Херсону. Будемо рухатись до цього крок за кроком. Підписав черговий указ про нагородження тих, хто найбільше відзначився у боях. Державними нагородами відзначені 63 військовослужбовця за хоробрість та ефективність у захисті держави. Загальна кількість відзначених нагородами вже 18 453. І такий масштаб, така кількість подвигів вповні демонструють, якого рівні протистояння і якої жорстокості бойові дії. Я дякую всім, хто став на захист нашої держави. Вічна пам'ять кожному і кожній, чиє життя забрали окупанти. Слава Україні!
And we can see there that President Zelensky was asking for more firepower, as of course it will help the Ukrainians to push the Russians back. And we can see that right now is the opportune time to try and push the Russians back, considering that it appears that they are exhausted supply-wise and also morale-wise. And so with that, we have now covered every single bit of news there is, except for the speech from President Zelensky for the night. Y'all may have thought that was the speech, but that was just a warm-up to the speech, because he was actually talking about something entirely different in that video, which was not his daily address. And so, here we are, at the very end of the news for the stream, the address from President Zelensky.
Міцний народе незламної країни. Сьогодні вже 110-й день нашої оборони. І коли це говориш, 110-й день, то розумієш, який великий шлях ми пройшли. Вдалося вибити ворога з Житомирщини, з Київщини, з Чернігівщини, з Сумщини. Вдалося звільнити значну частину Харківщини. Загалом більше 1000 населених пунктів звільнені. Зупинений наступ окупантів на півдні України. Так, вони досі хочуть зруйнувати і Миколаїв, і Запоріжжя, і міста Дніпропетровщини. Їм поки що вистачає сил, щоб бити з артилерії по Зеленодольську і Гуляйполю. Одеса залишається мішенню для російського флоту. Але вже були зірвані десятки спроб наступу російської армії саме там, саме на півдні. А завдяки контрнаступу вже звільнено частину громад Херсонщини. В боях на Донбасі, а вони точно увійдуть у воєнну історію як одна з найбільш жорстоких битв у Європі і за Європу. Українська армія і наша розвідка тактично все ж таки переграють російських військових. І це попри значну перевагу росіян у кількості техніки, а особливо в артилерійських системах. Ціна цієї битви для нас дуже висока. Вона просто страшна. І ми щоденно звертаємо увагу партнерів на те, що тільки достатня кількість сучасної артилерії для України забезпечить нашу перевагу і нарешті кінець російських знущань над українським Донбасом. Сьогодні стало відомо про загибель ще однієї дитини від російських обстрілів саме там, саме на Донбасі, в Луганській області. Хлопчик 2016 року народження. Він мешкав у Лисичанську, в звичайному будинку, на вулиці Московській. Ось так. 6-річний хлопчик на вулиці Московській також, як виявилось, небезпечний ворог для Російської Федерації. Ми маємо справу з абсолютним злом, і ми не маємо іншого вибору, ніж йти далі, звільняти всю нашу територію, вибивати окупантів з усіх наших областей. І хоча зараз ширина нашого фронту вже понад 2500 кілометрів, відчувається, що стратегічна ініціатива все ж таки за нами. Ми прийдемо в усі наші міста, в усі наші села, в яких поки що немає нашого прапору, немає на адміністративних будівлях, хоча українських прапорів там, я впевнений, дуже багато. Просто у людей, просто вдома. І ми їх вже бачили, коли люди протестували проти окупантів. І ми їх ще побачимо всюди, коли повернемось. Ми прийдемо в Херсон, і звичайні херсонці на вулицях міста будуть зустрічати саме нашу армію. Провал окупантів, які намагалися святкувати так званий День Росії, тільки доводить, що Херсон – це українське місто. І херсонці святкуватимуть тільки українські свята. Ми прийдемо в Мелітополь і повернемо усім мелітопольцям можливість жити без страху. І, до речі, усі колаборанти, які погрожують зараз відібрати землю у фермерів в Мелітополі та в інших районах Запоріжжя, самі дуже ймовірно опиняться у цій землі. Ми прийдемо в Маріуполь і звільнимо місто втретє, вже втретє. Його звільняли у 1943 році від нацистів, блискучою операцією. У 2014-му, саме у цей день, 13 червня, завдяки мужності наших азовців та інших підрозділів, Маріуполь був звільнений вдруге, звільнений від бойовиків, які тоді ще не усвідомлювали повністю, до чого їх направляє російська держава. А зараз вони це бачать. Бачать спалений Маріуполь. Бачать, для чого туди прийшли росіяни. Але ми не дозволимо зробити це місто мертвим. Ми повернемо його обов'язково. Потрібно тільки достатньо зброї, щоб це забезпечити. І вона є у партнерів в достатньому обсязі. І ми працюємо щодня, щоб з'явилась також і політична воля для надання нам цієї зброї. Ми прийдемо в Енергодар. І я хочу повторити кожному і кожній у місті, хто виходив на вулиці проти російських військових, хто відмовляється працювати з окупантами і хто сьогодні нас чекає. Хочу повторити, що ми ні на день не забули про наш Енергодар. Маємо розуміти, що окупанти тримають захоплену територію не просто в інформаційній блокаді. Я би назвав її цивілізаційною блокадою. Вони намагаються зробити так, щоб люди не просто нічого не знали про Україну і про те, як ми стараємось звільнити нашу територію, але й щоб навіть не думали про повернення до нормального життя, щоб змирились. В частині районів окупанти свідомо не дають відновити постачання електрики. У багатьох громадах вони просто заблокували зв'язок, відключають наше телебачення, закрили виїзд з окупації і просто не дають навіть гуманітарних коридорів, щоб ми могли завести людям хоча б базові товари і ліки. І я прошу усіх, у кого є така можливість спілкуватися з людьми на окупованому півдні, на Донбасі, на Харківщині, говоріть їм про Україну, говоріть їм правду, говоріть про те, що звільнення буде. Говоріть Кирилівці, Генічеську, Бердянську, Мангушу, говоріть Горлівці, Донецьку, Луганську, говоріть усім на Харківщині, хто ще змушений бачити російський прапор на нашій українській землі. Говоріть їм, що українська армія обов'язково прийде. Звичайно, ми звільнимо і наш Крим, Прапор України знову буде над Ялтою Судаком, над Джанкоєм Євпаторією. І хай кожен з російських посадовців, хто захопив собі дорогоцінну землю в Криму, пам'ятає, це не та земля, де їм буде спокій. Немає сьогодні тієї людини, яка точно скаже, скільки часу триватиме наш шлях до перемоги. Але абсолютна більшість людей сьогодні вже усвідомлює, саме такий наш шлях, саме так завершиться ця війна. Ми відбудуємо все, що зруйнували окупанти, від Волновахи до Чорткова, бо це Україна. І це на нашу долю випало повертати і укріплювати. Я пишаюся усіма нашими захисниками і захисницями. Вічна вам слава, вічна пам'ять кожному і кожній, чиє життя забрали окупанти. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the day 111 in news, and that was the end of the speech from President Zelensky. If you were here for the news alone, I do thank you so much for watching. This is the end of this segment. We'll now be moving into the question segment right afterwards. So if you would like, please make sure to subscribe. Also, like and comment, because it does help out our channel a lot. And also, you will be, if you do subscribe, getting the news every single day on the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, and also daily summaries, which give a small recap of some of the highlight, I guess you could say, clips and videos of the day that shows what went on the ground. So with that, I thank everyone who was just here for the news I thank everyone so much who was just here and watching for the news for watching, and I hope I will see you all tomorrow. But for the rest of y'all, we're about to go into the questions segment. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so we do have quite a few live chat questions and a few super chats to get to. So first up, we have a $100 donation, very generous, from Diffuse56, a longtime channel supporter and legend, who says, apologies to all for the dumb question I asked Starsky on Sunday night, an elderly brain fart. I said that the bridge Ukrainians missed destroying was behind Severodonetsk. Shane Ziggy pointed out that I must mean Bahorodichin. I'm not sure how to say that, but I think Enforcer knows what I mean. He says, too late by then to explain, but Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much, Diffuse56, for the massive amount of support. It helps us out a lot, and of course, I'm greatly appreciative for it. And to answer that question, you were actually a little bit of a fortune teller in a way, because the news came out today that the final bridge over the Severodonetsk River to Severodonetsk had been destroyed. And so you were only about 72 hours ahead of the news that the last bridge over the Severodonetsk River in that area had been destroyed. So it wasn't too much of a fault, because it literally happened just a day or two after you said that. So I wouldn't really worry about it all too much. And I'm sure that Starsky understands. We were trying to figure out which bridge it was. I would have to pull up that town in particular and where it may be, because I don't know exactly where that one is. But at the same time, it wasn't too much of a big deal, and it's perfectly fine. Everyone does make mistakes every once in a while, so I'm never just beating people to death over them or anything like that, because that would be inhuman. But I do thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Diffuse. You've been around forever, and you've always been supporting this channel. And I got to thank you so much once again, because it helps to keep this channel running. And without the support of our viewers, this channel can't keep on going. So I thank you once again. It does mean a lot to us. You don't even know how much it means to us. And with that, we're on to the next question. But thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have a super chat from William Allen, another channel supporter and longtime legend. And it seems like we have a bunch of those putting in super chats tonight. So thank you to all who are contributing to the channel. He puts in a $50 super chat and says, geez, Chicago is full of war crimes based on the innocents killed every weekend. Turf wars are always crimes against humanity, no matter countries, states, or clans or gangs. What are your thoughts?
I would have to agree for the large part, but those really aren't formal wars. I would just consider that crime, because of course it's a crime to murder. And so I would just kind of classify those as murder, because gangs don't really hold any official political status or diplomatic status or anything. They're just a gang of thugs that live in a city and they shoot each other for really no reason, rather than they're on the other side. So I wouldn't consider those war crimes, but to retouch on the war crime thing, I consider, I'm going to stick to my guns on this one, because to not stick to my guns on this would be hypocritical. If civilians are in an area and the combatants that are firing in that area know there's civilians there and targeted, that is direct. I've seen a lot of people trying to argue that that's indirect, but tell me what part of indirect is literally telling the artillery the coordinates where to fire and the coordinates are in a residential area. There's nothing indirect about that. If, for say, you were to give the coordinates of a pinpoint location and say there is an SPG right there and it's in the middle of a park and that shell happens to stray away from the SPG and then into a building and hit the building that has a family in it and kill it, that's indirect. But to fire an MLRS, which has a wide spread in the first place, into a residential area and say there's enemy combatants in there somewhere, there's civilians there too, who cares, just aim it in that direction and fire, that is direct. That's and to go off of that, this is why I'm never going to back off of that. To go off of that, I'm going to have to sit there and say that 40,000 people who died in Mariupol are just unfortunate casualties. Because the Russians were trying to push the Ukrainians out. The Ukrainians, we know, were fighting in those apartment buildings from block to block for months on end. And those civilians happened to be in those buildings with the soldiers at times, and they happened to be killed as well. In a modern war, in a modern world, using artillery in mass bombardments onto a civilian area is wrong. We know that from the Battle of Baghdad and the invasion of Iraq in 2003, you hardly even have to fire a single artillery shell in an urban battle. The United States hardly leveled any artillery on the city of Baghdad in 2003 and managed to push through it with nearly just infantry alone and took the city in 3 to 4 days. That tells me that you don't have to be leveling entire city blocks in the modern world and chalk up thousands of civilians as unfortunate casualties, because there is a way you can go around it without killing thousands of civilians. So in that regard, I'm going to have to stick to my guns. Of course, everyone's got their opinion. I still see people trying to say that, you know, that there is a way that it's explainable, but in my opinion, it's not. If you're using a widespread weapon and you don't have any idea where that missile's actually going to go once it's fired within a 100-yard radius, that in itself is pretty much a direct war crime. If they were to use an M777, for say, and fire at those forces that are in this area of Donetsk and hit those specific vehicles dead on, that's understandable. If the ranging shot was to be off and hit a building and kill a couple of people, that would be understandable. But to levy an MLRS against a suburb is very questionable to me. It's been questionable the entire war when the Russians have been doing it, and every time I've called it a war crime, everyone said and agreed that that was a war crime. And now that we've seen video evidence of the Ukrainians doing something similar, now everyone is not really all game to say that that may potentially be a war crime too. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stick to my guns on that one for everyone who's saying that, but that's my opinion on it. So with that, I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit, William. I don't really consider gang wars, once again, to be like war crimes because they aren't actual combating countries, but I do consider them to be heinous crimes, and I think it's a terrible drag on most urban cities that are somewhat large, is that there's almost always gangs, and they're always initiating some kind of fights, and I guess you could say the unfortunately lower end neighborhoods in the city. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from BC Skyman, a longtime channel supporter and legend, I might add, who says, "Hello, Enforcer. Any idea how the Ukrainians will be able to escape being surrounded in Severodonetsk? Did you hear that there is a possible 600 volunteer soldiers there also and will be executed? Slava Ukraine."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Yes, it does appear that volunteers are on the chopping block when it comes to executions. It seems like the DPR and LPR are very adamant about trying to kill the 2 British and Moroccan volunteer that they have at the moment. And so, as from now on, it seems like that will just be the go-to policy, is that any foreign volunteers that are captured will be killed. To move on to the next part about Severodonetsk, I don't think that the forces there are currently being encircled based off of all the information I have. The Ukrainians are pretty much holding the city in kind of like a half and half split, and the Russians aren't actually encircling them. Also, it'd be very hard for the Russians to encircle them because they would have to pretty much follow the bank of the Severodonetsk River, where the Ukrainians have a very strong defensive position on the western bank, which is several hundred feet higher, which means the Ukrainians would be able to look down onto the Russians and fire at them as they attempted an encirclement. So I don't think that's happened yet, and I don't think that'd be a reasonable thing for the Russians to do. because, of course, it would incur heavy casualties and it would be almost impossible. So to answer that first part, I have not heard about Severodonetsk being surrounded. As far as my information suggests right now, the city is still connected to Lysychansk, although all of the bridges have been destroyed. So with that, I hope that answers both parts of the question. And of course, I thank you very much for the support. It does help our channel to keep on running. And of course, it is always greatly appreciated for that reason. So with that, thank you once again. And we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Mycroft, another channel legend. And I think I'm going to be saying that a lot tonight, so please bear with me. Mycroft says, just donating because I love your content. Since you like to have a question, what is the likelihood that Ukraine will get some F-35s, or are they only getting F-16s?
Well, I thank you so much for the support, Minecraft, but sadly, the answer to that's probably going to be neither. We haven't really heard a lot of talks about sending over fighter aircraft at all, much less F-35s, and it sounds like they're not even going to send over anything for that matter beyond drones. We have heard that on the table, but that's not even confirmed yet at this point. So I would assume that neither the F-16 nor the F-35 is going to be sent over. I wish if an aircraft was to be sent, it would be the F-16 or the F-15, but it appears that the United States is still taking the Russian threats about sending aircraft over very seriously, and so sadly, they're not sending them over. But I do thank you very much for the support, Minecraft. You've been around for ages and supported this channel a very good bit, and it does help us to keep on running. So with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that does address the question, although you were just asking it to put a question in, which is always greatly appreciated too. And with that, we are on to the next question.
All right, and next up here we have a $20 donation from William Allen, who says, to the poll, no, the media is trying to move on to other topics, but we won't. And Enforcer, just for your reference, in case you didn't see it, the poll was about whether or not the Western states have sort of lost interest in the Ukraine war. And the majority of the viewers said that they believed yes. I believe it was like 53% of the viewers said that they believed that interest is, in fact, waning. And I would tend to agree with that somewhat. It seems like the American public as a whole is sort of losing focus a little bit on it. Like maybe their attention span is losing it. Obviously, us on the stream aren't, because we're watching every single night, but that's just my take on it.
I would have to agree. I would have to say that's true. And while you did say it's not really on this stream, and that's true, we have tens of thousands of people who watch this every night. We are noticing that apparently there is a bit of a waning, even amongst, I guess you could say, the more interested, that are no longer like interested in this war. And everyone's got to remember that the world works around fads, and when something becomes old, people move on. And regardless of how unfortunate and terrible and how important this war is in the modern world, people's attention spans just run out, and so they just start moving on. And I've kind of find that an unfortunate, I guess you could say, human characteristic. It's just something inherent within everyone. And I hate that it's inherent in most people, because once they stop paying attention, the politicians stop paying attention, and then this war just enters into the background. And then whatever happens after a while. The Ukrainians could lose, the Russians could lose, and no one really even cares. And once the victory comes around, people just see it as a small side headline in the news, and they're like, oh, look, that war is over. That happened like a year ago or so, and we stopped caring about a week or a month in. And then on top of that, there's also a whole bunch of social motives these days where people hop onto a bandwagon because it's really popular at the time, and they want to look like, like they're really out there, and they're really, I guess you could say, supporting a good cause. And then once they see that people's attention stops focusing on it, then they just stop focusing on it, and they move on too. And that's something that I've noticed a bit, is that there's less and less celebrities heading over to Ukraine showing their support because it's out of the public eye, and their managers are telling them to move on to something else. So I have noticed that, and I believe that would be true. But of course, the Lee Spring Army never stops paying attention on this stuff, and it's vitally important to the world right now how this war goes, and that's why we continuously focus on it, and that's why we're always asking for more support for Ukraine and encouraging everyone to go out there and support Ukraine as much as possible. It's very important to do that. They are, of course, on the right side. They've been fighting a good fight, and they've been fighting incredibly well, hardly asking for anything rather than just some material support to give to their soldiers to keep them going. They've never asked for the U.S. military to directly intervene. They've never asked for NATO to directly intervene. And you've got to admire them for their, I guess you could say, qualities. Their qualities of just standing up on their own and saying, all we need is a little bit of help and we can get the job done. And that's honestly impressive to me. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're moving on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from White Lightning 777, who says,
Lightning.
Yes. How many Russian soldiers are female?
I have no clue. That's something that we've seen. Everyone may remember that video from years ago where the cute Russian girl was singing that Russian song and it became popular and went worldwide. I don't know how many Russian girls there are in the military. We know that there's some, but it seems like they're largely relegated to support roles, not combat roles, like we've seen some Ukrainian women in. And unfortunately, I don't actually have a figure on that. We could try and pull one up. How many women are in the Russian military? Minister Shoigu stated there were approximately 41,000 enlisted women in the Russian armed forces. And if you take that against the total, how many soldiers are in the Russian military? And we're going to take the combined total. 1 million exactly. Well, not really 1 million exactly, but we're going to round down for the simplistics of the math. But 1 million divided by... Wait a minute, no, sorry. 41,000... divided by 1 million. So around 4% of the Russian military is female. So I hope that does answer the question. I can't really elaborate on that too much. It's just a statistic alone. But it appears that around 4% of their military is female. So I hope that answers the question. And I do thank you very much for the support. I've also heard that they're snipers as well, and I just saw someone say that in the comments section. And that's one of the few combat roles they get. But beyond that, we don't see them taking up like a standard infantryman role or a position on a mortar crew or anything like that. So I hope that does answer the question, and we're on to the next one.
And it is now time to recognize a few of our donors who did not leave a comment but have left a contribution to the channel. So first up, we have a $20 donation from Dragoon50. Then we have a couple of $18 donations. We have one from Not a Channel and from Fecklar7. And then we have a $10 donation from Kent Hoover. So thank you very much to all 4 of y'all for your contributions to the channel. We would love to answer your questions, but y'all did not want to put one in. But thank you very much for your support. And let's see here. Next up, we have a $20 donation from Will Riley. And guess what? We haven't heard from Dick Cheney in quite some time, but we hear from him tonight. Will Riley says, Dick Cheney is pondering running for world president. Who do you think would be a good VP to run with this all-powerful being? He still thinks Brown Snake is an awful name for that despicable Australian creature.
Well, I think that the best person to follow up and become vice president with him would be... Let me think this one out. I gotta really think about this one. It would be... I had him in my head right before I answered this, and then I forgot him. Oh, man, let me think. I would say Homelander. I think he would make a great vice president. If y'all know what I'm talking about, you know. If you don't, you don't. But with that, I hope that answers who would be VP. And also, I can't understand also why brown snake is the most poisonous snake on Earth. Well, let's type that in. Brown snake. There's the brown snake. It's a highly venomous snake, of course, in Australia. That's why it's the most poisonous one in the world. But here's a picture of it, and this thing looks so unassuming. Like, you have the king cobra, you have the black mamba, the copperhead, the rattlesnake. They all have something special about them. Then you got brown snake, which looks like a normal snake, and this is the most deadly one in the world. So I just gotta say, I don't know why this thing is so unassuming looking. Apparently, it's one of the most poisonous in the world, but I hope that answers the question. It addresses that comment at least, because I don't know why it's called the brown snake either. It should be called something cool, like I don't know, Amber Heard's turd or something like that. But with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address both parts of the question. And with that, we're moving on to the next one.
And moving on, next up we have an $18 donation from Olivia McCarthy, who says, is this going to turn into Vietnam or Afghanistan?
It's not going to turn into Vietnam, because there's no north and south side that's conflicting here, and there's no there's no proxy war like that one was. Like, we don't have quote unquote American observers on the other side yet, and I don't think we ever will, because this is of course a war directly with Russia. And if you're talking about Afghanistan, I don't know which one you're talking about, whether it's the Soviet Afghanistan or the American Afghanistan, but I don't think it's going to turn into that either, because a large amount of both of those wars was involved with guerrilla warfare, where most of the country was controlled by one side or the other, and then the opposition was, just pretty much a bunch of people that were poorly armed, pretty much conducting partisan attacks on the regular military. I don't think it's going to turn into that, because while the Ukrainians aren't making any ground, they aren't losing any either, which is the most important part of the defensive war, is that you don't really have to gain ground to be winning. The Russians have to keep on pushing the Ukrainians back to keep on winning. And if they don't, that's considered losing. An offensive war is made to take over a country. And so if you're no longer advancing and taking ground and therefore winning the war, they're losing. So the Ukraine, all they have to do is hold their ground, and they're doing it pretty well. And in this regard, I would say that this may turn into a very weird, like, Syrian civil war kind of situation. While it's not a civil war, in context of how the front lines are not going to change for some while, it may become that. Or another good explanation is that this may become the 100 Years' War. The front lines didn't really move much during the 100 Years' War. Obviously, it lasted for a little over 100 years. And whenever they did move, it took decades sometimes. So with that, I hope that answers the question. Also, interesting fun fact, the English actually owned Paris at one point during the 100 Years' War for about 20-something years. So at one point, Paris was actually an English city, which is bizarre. But anyways, I hope that kind of addresses the question, Oliver, and I thank you so much for the support. I think that may actually be the first time you support this channel, and if it is, we're always greatly appreciative for everyone's support, and it helps out this channel a huge deal. And so with that, we're going to move on to the question, and I thank you once again.
All right, and up next we have a $10 donation from Eduardo Gonzalez, who says Ukraine needs to attack the missile sites that continue to launch from Russian bases. Consequences be damned.
Could you reread that one to me real quick? I think I may have lost the context. So could you reread that?
So Eduardo says Ukraine needs to attack the missile sites that continue to launch from Russian bases. Consequences be damned.
Well, that would be a pretty good idea. I can agree with that. But the problem is that most of the Russian missile bases, if they're not mobile, like we've seen the Iskander and Caliber launchers, which are of course mobile units, most of them are pretty deep within the country. And then the ones that are not are actually well defended, and attacking them really wouldn't do much because most of them are made to withstand a nuclear explosion. So in that regard, I agree with the sentiment, and I would wish that that's something they could do, but I don't think it's actually feasible. So with that, I hope that does address the comment. Of course, consequences be damned. We've seen the Ukrainians damn the consequences multiple times before, like the helicopter raid on Belgorod, and also a couple of the missile attacks that they've done on Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod, attacking military infrastructure. And so in that aspect, I can agree entirely. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from William Allen again, who says the U.S. has the weapons that can be accurate. Not all countries do, and as a combat vet, it is kill or be killed. Damn the legal mambo jambo. That's why the Russians and others don't give a damn. They're not equals morally.
Well, thank you for the support. But the thing is again, is that it is, and this is my opinion, so, of course, just take it with a grain of salt. But in the modern world, that's what the modern world's going in. That would be like saying, in the medieval ages, it was common when someone took over a city to pillage the city, rape the women, kill all the men, just have a fun time. But we've moved on beyond that, and that's considered unacceptable behavior in the 20th century even. And moving into the 21st century, it's completely unacceptable. Moving from the 20th century and World War II, it was perfectly fine to go and carpet bomb cities and kill tens of thousands of people, because that was really the only way that you could fight a war. But once guided munitions started to become a thing, wars were supposed to go in the direction, and they are supposed to be in the direction, of if you're in an urban area, you either use guided munitions on a target that can hit it dead on with incurring very little to no civilian casualties, or you push through the city without the support of artillery whatsoever. And we've seen the United States do that time and time again, regardless whether they had guided munitions or not, especially after World War II and Korea. And most of the time, they were able to succeed without artillery and without having to level entire cities. And that's what we were talking about at the very beginning. That's what we've been talking about the entire time with the Russians during the course of this war, is that the Russian strategy is abhorrent and it's terrible. They level cities, they kill all the civilians in the cities if they have to then try and push the Ukrainians out. And that's considered a terrible thing. You know, and we talk about the Ukrainians, they actually fight street to street like they are in Severodonetsk. You don't see the Ukrainians levying artillery on the other side of Severodonetsk. We've never seen that. They do not use artillery in urban areas for the most part. They just fight from street to street. The Russians don't, however. And that's what separates the Ukrainians from the Russians. And so in that instance, I'd have to say that you can see right there, there's an example. The Ukrainians are actually fighting according to a Western doctrine, not using artillery in an urban area, and they're fighting street to street. The Russians, on the other hand, are not, which they're killing civilians in the process of doing, and that's a war crime. And that's, and I know that a lot of people are saying, oh, you know, you need to read the rules of war and stuff because there's collateral and not collateral and all that stuff. But whenever we watched white phosphorus being dropped on Ukrainian soldiers weeks ago, and they were in a somewhat civilian area, and we were literally watching a soldier surrounded in houses look up and watch phosphorus rain down on them, everyone went, that's a war crime. And it is. And right now I feel like with the opinion that everyone's taking right now, if the Ukrainians were to drop white phosphorus on the Russians in Severodonetsk with them being around civilians, everyone would just say that's acceptable. And it's, you know, I'm just going to be very frank here. I feel like there's a double standard being applied here by most, and I don't really think I'm not into double standards. I'm pro-Ukrainian, but I'm not going to be pro-Ukrainian to the point I'm going to overlook what I've been saying about the Russians for weeks and months on end and start saying something opposite and hypocritical. So with that, I kind of hope that answers the question where I'm coming from, and hopefully people can understand. And once again, it's just an opinion. So you can take it for what you want, but that's my opinion. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I thank you so much for the support once again.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from The Big Cheese, who says, what percent of the U.S. population do you think actually knows that the Russian media keeps threatening the U.S. with nuclear war? And before the enforcer answers that, I actually ran a poll on that specific question, and from the viewers in the chat, it appears that about 54% of you believe that there is a sector of the U.S. population that is sort of living under a rock, per se, and does not know about it. Granted, not everybody wants to follow world events that closely, but I think all of you on the channel would agree that to be informed, it's probably best to know what's going on in the world. But I'll let the enforcer answer that question.
Could you reread that one to me one more time?
So they said, what percent of the U.S. population do you think actually knows that the Russian media keeps threatening the U.S. with nuclear war?
Well, I think a lot of people do know. I don't think they know it now. They did know it at the very start of the war, and that's what led to a lot of people focusing on this war, because a lot of people heard that the Russian forces had been put on high alert, the nuclear forces had, and they were hearing all of these nuclear threats, and that's what led to a decent amount of people focusing on the war about 2 to 3 weeks in. And you can see that analytically on YouTube, is that there was a massive spike in viewership of everything Ukraine war on weeks 2 to 3, because that's when the nuclear threats were being thrown around pretty heavily by the Russians. So I feel for the large part, a lot of people did know about them at the start of the war, but they don't really know about the underlying nuclear threats that keep on being sent our way at this point right now. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much for the support. It is a little bit of a brief one, but I feel like that covered it fairly well. And so I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Junebug with the 72 at the end, who does not leave a comment. So thank you very much, Junebug72. Thank you very much for that donation. I was about to say something, but totally left my mind there. But thank you for that donation. And next up, we have an $8 donation from Fat Bass, who says, lots of partisan activity in Kherson and around Melitopol, killing collaborators and orcs, causing a lot of paranoia for the orcs.
We have heard about that, and we actually have that little area highlighted on the map. That's about as big as we think it is. It could be larger at this point. We don't really know. There's not a lot of information on it. But we do see, by and large, that these partisans are conducting activities behind the lines, but we don't have any idea of what they really are. We've seen them take some prisoners, and we've seen them destroy some logistics, but we haven't really seen them doing much beyond that. It does seem to be the normal run-of-the-mill partisan activities. And so in that regard, I can't agree. They've been I don't know about killing collaborators. I don't know about that because I don't know how they would figure out who's a collaborator and who's not. But we have seen them attacking the Russian forces behind the lines, and they've been causing a large amount of chaos to the point that the Russians brought in an armored train to try and scare them away from the railroads. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, or at least address the comment. And I thank you so much for the support, because it is true that the partisans are apparently wreaking hell behind the lines in that area. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I thank you once again.
And next up, we have an $8 donation from NOYDB, who says, this is a Siemens problem. Gazprom announced a 40% reduction in gas deliveries to Europe via the Nord Stream pipeline, blaming German engineering giant Siemens for failing to restore key turbines, quote-unquote, on time.
Interesting. I haven't really been watching a lot of the news internationally. Of course, I kind of get a little narrow sighted and focused specifically on frontline news for the most part. But that is something that we have seen in the development here, and I think that that's going to start having a massive impact, especially on Western European gas prices, and specifically Germany's electrical grid and its power source. Most of Germany's grid runs on coal and, I believe, gas. And so the lack of that gas is going to start having some massive effects on their power grid. And they're, of course, probably going to have to try and import that power from neighboring countries. And then that's going to put a massive strain on countries like France, Britain, and Poland that also are not really having a lot of free energy, I guess you could say, to export on their grids. So with that, I thank you once again so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment in a way. And of course, it's interesting information to hear, because we don't really look at that too much on the channel. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I thank you so much once again.
And next up, we have an $8 donation from Backyard Bee Farm, who says, hi guys, here's my question. What do you think Ukraine and the international fighters can do to counter the overwhelming superiority Russia has in artillery? The Russian artillery seems to be a huge problem.
The only way to counter Russian artillery is through counter-artillery or by airstrikes. Airstrikes are incredibly difficult to do because both sides have incredibly strong surface-to-air and missile defense systems, and so it's really hard to get an aircraft close enough to be able to fire off its munitions and destroy the artillery. When I say close enough, I mean like almost like 50, 60 miles away with a guided munition, and if you're using dumb bombs, then, you know, of course, you have to pretty much fly right over them. But even at that, an S-300 and S-400 air defense system can reach out hundreds of miles, and so you have to fly through like nearly 100 miles of air defense to reach an area where you can even launch a guided rocket, a guided missile at the artillery. So largely counter battery by other artillery is the only way to fight back against Russian superiority. And then that's where the M142 comes in, which will be critically important because it has a range of some 50 miles with its standard rockets. And that's much farther than most MLRS systems that are currently being used on the front. And so in that instance, the M142 may become Ukraine's go-to counter-battery system because it'll be safe from counter-battery in its own right. It won't be able to be hit. And on top of that, it will be able to destroy Russian artillery. So I believe, by and large, that's going to be the only way the Ukrainians can counter Russian artillery and its superiority in numbers. But beyond its superiority in numbers is inferior in almost every single way compared to what the Ukrainians are already fielding. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much for the support. I hope it was a pretty good one. I tried to put a pretty decent amount of effort into answering it like I do every other one. So with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $27 donation from Jonesy, who says, rules have to apply to all, not just the bad guys. Not always easy to stand by, but true. Appreciate your hard work and Slava Ukraine.
And I thank you so much for the support. And it's always good to hear, you know, because I saw that the poll was actually half and half, nearly, wasn't it, Matthew? Like some people, like half said it was a war crime, half said it wasn't.
Yeah, it was pretty split in the chat.
Yeah, and so it's good to see that there is two sides to this, and I think it is something a little contentious, but I hold modern militaries to a very high standard. If you ask me about anything in history, like World War II with carpet bombings, and you ask me about either side, I would say it's acceptable because that was literally the only way to fight wars back then. But we've moved on so far beyond that these days, and people could say that the United States has set the exemplar for accuracy and so on, which is true. But that's what modern world's supposed to be. And I've been sitting here dogging on the Russians, and I'm not going to go over this rant too long because I've done it like twice tonight. But we've seen the Russians doing this for months. And once you sit here and you make this arbitrary line where if you're not trying to directly attack civilians, it's okay. Well, what's directly attacking? I mean, like you can draw that line in any direction you want. And that's why I'm not a big fan of that kind of rule, because then you could sit there and say, well, the Russians weren't directly targeting all the civilians in Mariupol. They were just trying to hit the soldiers, and they happened to miss a little bit, and then they killed 40,000 people or so. And that's where I don't like to draw in these gray areas, because you could start to actually argue for the Russians when you go down those routes and actually make it seem like what they've done is justifiable and understandable. And it's not, and that's why I sit here and I make actual distinctions. Things have to be black and white. There can never be room for arbitration or some kind of different understandings. Things have to be clear. It's either acceptable or it's unacceptable. In the United States, civilian casualties of any kind are unacceptable. Whenever we actually heard in the public that the United States had conducted an airstrike against an area that had some civilians in it and 20 people got killed, the U.S. military would immediately launch a full investigation into what happened. The rules of engagement would change. The rules of engagement got so long and lengthy that you pretty much had to go up the whole chain of command and back down to make sure that there were no civilians in the area to be able to shoot. I've known veterans from the U.S. military that served in Afghanistan and Iraq that told me that the Afghans, of course, would pretty much stand in the midst of children and shoot at the Americans, while in this group of kids, and they could not shoot back. They could not risk killing these kids trying to kill this guy, because regardless whether they were acceptable casualties or not, because they were trying to kill the Taliban guy, the rules of engagement didn't allow it. And in that instance, that lets me know that it is a war crime, because the United States has rules of war that lay out that you cannot be shooting at enemy combatants while civilians are around, like in that instance. Otherwise, they would have done it. So I'm glad you agree with me. Of course, once again, while I do sound like I'm talking strongly about this, it is just my opinion, and everyone can agree, and everyone can agree to disagree. And so, that's just my opinion. But I thank you for the support, and I thank you very much for agreeing with me there. Of course, it's not like I'm trying to make people who disagree with me out to be enemies. Everyone's got an opinion, but that's my opinion. And I mean, like, that just is what it is. I know everyone's saying read the rules of war, but the thing is that the rules of war are written once you see something that's unacceptable. We could go back to World War I. I'm going to give this example. You could go back to World War I when poison gas was used, and I could sit there and go, wow, that's really bad and inhumane. And you could have used the argument back then, well, yeah, but it's not against the rules of war. And it wasn't at the time, but it was inhumane. So it was written into the rules of war, poison gases were not supposed to be used. So in this regard, if the rules of war are written in a way that apparently what the Russians are doing is somewhat acceptable, then I believe the rules of war should be written where it's not acceptable. And so with that, thank you very much once again for the support. Thank you everyone for listening to the TED Talk again. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we now have a $20 donation from Rotormax, who does not leave a comment. So thank you very much, Rotormax, for that $20 contribution. We appreciate your support of the channel. And moving on, we now have a $10 donation from Laszlo Uriel, who says, how about a quick history refresher of Crimea and Russia's invasion and occupation of it?
All right, so we're going to start off right at 2014, so this one doesn't get too long, because I always like to go back to the dawn of time and start from there, because there's nuances there. But in 2014, there was this thing in Ukraine called the Revolution of Dignity, also called the Maidan riots, if you'd like to call it that. The people of Ukraine pretty much overthrew the pro-Russian government over the course of riots, and pretty much installed a pro-EU government. The Russians were scared that this pro-EU government that just got installed was going to revoke their basing rights in Sevastopol for the Black Sea Fleet, And so the Russians, in response to that, pretty much backed Russian separatists in the DPR and LPR, and also within Crimea, to rise up against the Ukrainians. In the DPR and LPR, and also in Crimea, when this whole entire thing kicked off, Russian forces crossed the border in every single direction. Well, actually, they didn't cross the border in Sevastopol. They literally drove out of the port, and they started to help these separatists take these areas of land. The Russians, of course, denied all involvement, but nowadays we actually have confirmed numbers of how many soldiers were involved. We also know which units were involved. I believe the 186 Marine Brigade was actually involved in the annexation of Crimea, if I'm remembering a specific unit right. And then, of course, over the course of 23 hours, the state of Crimea became an independent country, and then it asked for Russian statehood, and then it was approved, and then it became a part of the Russian Federation. Donetsk and Luhansk were never recognized until just a day or two before this war started on February 24th, and they just remained breakaway rebel regions in Ukraine that Russia didn't really want to back too much at the time, but also didn't want to leave out to hang and dry, I guess you could say. So that's kind of like the brief rundown history of what happened in Crimea and the Donbass during that time. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from William Allen again, who says, if things have to be in black and white, why are, let me see here, I think he meant to say something else. Let me start over. He says, if things have to be in black and white, why are they not written that way?
Well, they somewhat are. They somewhat are, because you see, the thing is that murder is unacceptable. You know, that's a pretty common rule. Theft is unacceptable as well. The use of poison gas is completely banned in war. The use of chemical or biological warfare is completely banned as well. I mean, there are a lot of black and white rules out there. There's also rules like you can't torture prisoners. That's a pretty black and white rule. You know, there's not really a lot of interpretation in there on that one. If you're like popping someone's fingernails off, that would be torture. If you're feeding them and just keeping them in a cell, that's not really torture. So that's kind of, you know, I mean, like, there are rules out there that are not exactly black and white. But by and large, they usually are. So with that, I hope that kind of answers the question. And I thank you once again, William, for the support. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And next up, we have another super chat from William Allen, who puts in a, oh, let me get that cam bot. That's the third time it showed up tonight.
Man.
Okay, it's gone. So back to William Allen. So he puts in another $20 super chat and says, sorry, my fingers didn't work. He meant to say, then why are the laws written in black and white and at the 10th grade level to remove all the gray in between? Ask your professor in law school, LOL. And William Allen, I have to say, I kind of disagree with the enforcer on that one just a little bit. There's actually, in my opinion, a decent amount of gray area in most laws. Like, for example, obviously I'm not speaking on the international stage sense, but there are some instances where it's okay to murder somebody. For example, if you're defending your life or something of that nature, I mean, there's gray area to my opinion, at least, to most things, especially in the law. But I'll let the enforcer take it from here.
Well, of course, Matthew's got his own opinions. Of course, we throw them around every once in a while. But I would say the law, in my opinion, the laws are written in black and white, and that law kind of goes into a different category, which is self-defense, which is kind of a different set of laws in its own that are written in black and white. Like, you can't walk up to someone on the street and just blow their head off and then say, you know, I was defending myself, and then you're clear. That was murder. And, you know, that's the black and white definition of murder. Meanwhile, if that guy was coming up to you with a knife and said, I'm going to slit your throat and, like, eat your brains or something, and then you pulled out a gun and shot him while he was lunging at you, you know, it's a black and white case of self-defense nearly. But then, you know, I can understand where Matthew's coming from with this, because then you go into a courtroom and then you have to argue that it was self-defense or not sometimes. So I can see where he's coming from. He's got some pretty valid points. And so by and large, I would say that most laws are written in black and white, but I will give on that one and say that there is some gray area in others. But in this one aspect with the civilians and people trying to argue that they're just, you know, casualties of war, I feel like there really shouldn't be a gray area there, and civilian casualties, by and large, should be considered war crimes, and if they do happen, they should be incredibly few and far in between. So with that, I hope that does answer the question once again, William. And of course, I thank you for the huge amount of support you sent in tonight. It helps out our channel a lot, and it helps us to stay here and, of course, debate these interesting questions on stream. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I thank you once again for the support, William.
And I will correct one thing real quick. I saw somebody say it in the chat saying it's technically not murder if it's in self-defense, and you are correct. I misspoke. I meant to say to kill somebody. In some instances, it's justified to kill somebody, and in self-defense, it would be. So yes, you are correct on that, and I misspoke. So up next, we have a $5 super chat from Big Cheese again, who says, "Just wanted to say hello from California tonight, and thank you for the news."
Well, thank you so much for the support. Of course, it's cool to hear that we do have supporters from around the world and all the way from the other side of the country in California. So, hope you're having a fun time over there. Of course, it's probably like earlier on, although it is nighttime over there by now. But I hope you've had a fun time watching the stream tonight. And of course, I'm more than honored that you do find this channel worthy of supporting and helping us to continue to carry on our news. And so with that, we're on to the next question. And I thank you once again for the support.
And next up here, we have a $5 donation from Mr. Lunchtime, who says, "Here's a few bucks for a hamburger, fries, and a Diet Coke from, now my favorite fast food joint, Tasty." And that's it. Stay toasty, my friends. And I have to question whether or not this is actually Mr. Lunchtime donating, because I have really serious doubts that Mr. Lunchtime would donate his lunch money to somebody.
You know, I've been thinking that as well. And on top of that, he's offering us food. Like, why wouldn't he eat it? But with that, we're just playing with you, man. I thank you so much for the support. And it was a pretty good joke. I don't know what Tasties is, but we will try it. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support. And we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up here, we have a $5 donation from Polar Doom 420, who says, My man and I have watched since day 4 or so. Love your stream and the fundraisers very much. He introduced me to your channel. Happy 43rd birthday, Ryan. And I will say, happy birthday to you, Ryan. I'm not sure if you're watching at the moment or if you've already gotten off for the night, but happy birthday.
And I gotta say happy birthday to you as well, Ryan. 43 is one hell of a year, and so I hope you have a lot of fun coming from experience as a 20-year-old. Your 43rd year is one of your best years, and so I thank you very much for the support. And also, it's really cool to hear that he actually brought you onto these streams, which is really cool, honestly, for me to hear that people actually share this around with their friends and family and stuff like that. And so I hope you have been enjoying it as well. Of course, you most likely have. You did send in support to help us to keep running. And so I thank you once again for the support. And it's always greatly appreciated. And we always love to know that we have people out here who really enjoy what we do. And so I thank you once again. And with that, we're moving on to the next question.
Okay, I'm seeing multiple people say in the chat. I was kind of curious about this. I saw a headline today while I was passing by the TV. That McDonald's in Russia has been rebranded, and it looks like it's now called Tasties, and that's what Mr. Lunchtime was referring to just a moment ago.
Interesting. I actually did not know about that, but that's one stupid name for a fast food restaurant is Tasties. That's like calling it Hunger or something like that. But anyways, I thank y'all for letting me know that because I had no clue that that was what they were calling the reopened McDonald's. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up we have a $5 donation from B. Dobson, who says, "I still think flyers with surrender chits for cash and 3 hots and a cot might go a long way."
Dude, this guy's advocating that we send the Tinder bot over to Ukraine.
Oh, okay, that's what he's saying. Okay.
Yeah, he's pretty much saying that the bots that we get here in the live chat should be sent to Russia. I would agree. I think that they may actually fall for him, and so we're going to take the bots out of the chat, send them to Russia, and we're going to see how that goes. And so with that, of course, I thank you very much for the support, and also the pretty good recommendation right there, because that actually got a pretty good chuckle out of me. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, but once again, I thank you for that great joke and the support.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Ukraine, F. Putin, who says, "Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, and everyone behind the scenes, thank you for bringing together such a great group of supportive people, and keep up the great work." And thank you very much for the compliment.
And I thank you very much for the compliment too. We have a decent amount of Discord mods which do a whole lot of work on the Discord, which sadly I can't get on much. But I got to give huge credit to Crazy, Matthew Flynn, who's also one of the Discord mods, and a whole bunch of other ones. We've got loads of them, like Susie, and I would name them all, but I don't want to make it sound like it's an obituary here. But they've been doing a great job helping out on the Discord, which sadly I don't really get a lot of time to roam around to. And then Matthew and me are the only people on this team rather than Overseer. Overseer, we're going to keep anonymous forever. They don't want to be known who they are. But Matthew and me run the whole thing from start to finish, and so everything you see is actually the end result of our work directly. There's no artist, there's no one that compiles the map. I do the map. Matthew does the merch. He does all the question gathering and stuff like that on stream on his own. He moderates the chat. And so I thank you so much for the support, and I'm very thankful that you do thank everyone on our team, from Matthew and me to our Discord mods, for all the work we do, because we try and make sure that this is a very good place to go, that stays largely unopinionated, although I did get opinionated about the prisoner, well, not the prisoner, for the killing of civilians kind of stuff. I did get a little bit opinionated on that, but largely we try and keep it unopinionated and just on the news alone. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much once again for the support and also the kind words. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Olivia McCarthy again, who says, is the goal to just bleed Russia dry and keep fighting and then go on the counterattack?
That may be the goal. And one thing that I have been thinking, and I'll just share this, is that the Ukrainians may be saying that they're weak and they really can't go on, and that may be misinformation. That wouldn't be the first time that a country has deceived another one into confidence to then slam them down immediately, and that may be something that the Ukrainians are doing, although we don't have enough information to go either direction on that. So I would actually say that this is kind of a war of attrition at this point, where the Ukrainians in the Western world are hoping to grind the Russians down to a nub and then just sweep them off the floor, and then that'll be the end of the war. So I think that may be one of the ways that the West and Ukraine are going about this, and if it is, it's going to be very interesting to see how low the Russians go before they actually get knocked out of the fight. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Nick Anderson, who says, we need to plan a Leaf Spring Army trip to Ukraine.
Well, I would agree. But the thing is I don't know how that will work, and I don't really know how that would be managed. But I think it would be really cool. I think it would largely just be, hey, and by the way, I'm going to tell you all this. I'm actually planning on a face reveal at 100,000 subscribers, because I found out that some people did find some of my social media accounts, and also some other accounts as well with my face on it, and they actually found me. Of course, I've blocked them now. Well, not blocked them. I've turned them off, so no one else can find them. But my face is out there, and people have seen it. And so if anyone really wanted to track me down and kill me and figure out what I look like to do that, they probably already have done that. So I'm probably going to do a face reveal at 100,000 subs, which will probably be soon, probably within the next month. And once I do that, then I will pretty much be free to tell y'all where I am, what I'm doing in specific instances. I'm not going to tell y'all like I'm going to the grocery store or anything. So that way, I can have a lot more interactivity with fans in public, instead of just doing it over, the stream and Discord every once in a while. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I think that we might be able to manage that if everything goes to plan. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are moving on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Chris Webb, who says, for that coffee.
Well, I thank you so much for giving us support for that coffee, and we will make sure to use it for that coffee. And so I thank you very much once again for the support. Helps us out a lot. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have another $5 donation from Big Cheese, who says, I'm not from California, I'm from Texas, but because of my job, I travel all over the Southwest.
Well, Texas is not a bad place to be either. I've heard some really interesting things about Texas. Never been there myself. The closest I've ever gotten to Texas, I believe, was... let me look at this map here. We drove over from Vicksburg. We went to Monroe. Yeah, the closest I've ever gotten, I believe, is like Ruston or Monroe. So I've never actually been into Texas. But the closest... Actually, no. The closest Matthew and me ever got was driving down Interstate 70 through Kansas. Kansas was really cool. I mean, like, it's unbelievably flat. Like, if y'all think there's flat, there's Kansas flat, and that's flat. And that was really cool to see in person because I never believed it until I saw it. But that's actually really cool to hear. And you must really have a traveling job to the point you're like flying on a plane or something, because to go from Texas to California, like that'd be like a 14, 15-hour trip probably, maybe even longer, like 2-day trip. But anyways, with that, I thank you once again for the support, and that's actually really cool to hear. And I hope you have a pretty fun job you're happy with to be traveling that much. And so with that, we're on to the next question, and I thank you once again so much for the support.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Cliff Bingham, who says, "Hi, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt. Thanks for the great coverage. And are you guys brothers? How did you come up with the name Enforcer, and have you ever considered using your real name?" To answer that first question, I'll take the honor of answering that one. Yes, we are brothers. I'm 21, he's 20, and I'm going to let the Enforcer take it from there.
And to answer the rest of that question, Matthew answered the first one spot on. I'm 20, he's 21. And let's see, how did you come up with the name Enforcer? Well, that's kind of a little bit of a tough answer. Because it's actually my gaming name. This is actually the name I have in most video games. That's my username. And this channel was actually started off as a current events channel called Think Tank, and then the name got switched to The Briefing, which is why if you ever go onto the Discord server, it's called The Briefing Room, and I've never changed the name because it's in honor of what this channel was originally called, because when it finally started to upload videos, it was called The Briefing. And then after The Briefing kind of failed because no one watched the videos I made, and I put like a week of time into making each of them, I went on into gaming after like a month break. And so then I switched the channel name to The Enforcer because that was my name in most games. And the reason why I picked the name Enforcer was because it sounded cool. There was really like no other reason to it. A lot of people say I don't act like an enforcer and I don't sound or act as intimidating as my profile picture would make them think. But I really just do all that because I think it looks cool, you know, and like what other reason to do something than just do it because it's cool. And so that's how I got the name Enforcer. And then when I put it on here, I was like, yeah, I mean, like, you know, that'd be cool as a YouTube thing. And I never thought about it as a war channel or a news channel thing. But then I just kept it because it's like, what's the point of changing the name? You know, people will just know me as the Enforcer, and that'll be that. And I have considered using my real name, but I don't really want to, because I feel kind of like the Enforcer is just a cool name. It kind of keeps a cool little personality thing around the show, and using my real name will kind of blanding it down into something that you can find anywhere on the internet, you know, because a lot of people use their normal, you know, like real name. And so I kind of just want to use the Enforcer because it kind of adds a little bit of, you know, neatness to the whole entire thing. It makes it a little bit more unique. So I hope that answers the question, Cliff Bingham. And of course, I thank you so much for the support. And so with that, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next here, we have a $5. And first off, before I move on to the next super chat, I have to say, I'm always surprised that everybody thinks that we're so much older than we actually are. Somebody said, "There's no way that's a 21-year-old's voice." Yes, I'm a 21-year-old with a voice of somebody that sounds like they've been smoking a pack of cigarettes at least once a day for like their entire life.
Well, you don't sound like John Mellencamp, though.
Yeah, that's true. Nobody can sound quite like that guy.
That's true. But with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Junebug, who says, "The Enforcer Tumbler Cup I bought came in today. Posted a pic in the Discord chat, and I highly recommend. It's really good quality." And first off, thank you very much, Junebug, for buying the merch. As always, that helps support the channel as well, and you get something out of it, as the Enforcer always says. And I'm glad you like it.
And I'm very glad you like it too. It's always cool to hear that people do get the merch. By the way, another merciless plug, the second one this stream. We are running limited edition merch right now. Make sure to get some if you do want to support the channel. And we've got 3 different cool designs to pick from. A mug, 2 different kinds of shirts and hoodies that have Moscow Mike and also Professor Mortar on them, and we also got stickers. And so if you would like to support the channel and get some more cool merch, we do have those up on the store right now. It's a limited run, and it will be down at Saturday at midnight. So I hope I hope a lot of y'all do get the merch and support the channel. That's another way that we do support what we do here. And also, it helps y'all to get some really cool stuff out of it. And if you would like to advertise the channel without going up to your friends and sounding like crazy and be like, hey, have y'all ever heard about the Enforcer? That's a great way to do it. They're great conversational pieces. We always make them look interesting enough that we would think that people would ask, hey, what's that from? And then you could tell them, oh, it's the Enforcer channel. Have you ever heard of it? And so if you would like to help like spread the word of the channel, that's of course a great way to do it as well. And so with that, I hope you do enjoy your merch, Junebug, because Matthew does put a decent amount of effort into the design of it, and I do a lot of the creative aspect. Like, he'll come up with a rough draft, and then I come in there, I'm like, oh, okay, like, we could change this and that, and he changes it, like, he changes it into perfection. Every single time, I've never had a complaint with his final product. It goes out, and it's wonderful looking. And so I hope you do enjoy it, and with that, we're on to the next question.
And I just saw here that somebody said, the Enforcer is my current history professor. And Enforcer, I hate to say it, but they found you out.
Yeah, they did. It's really unfortunate. But to be serious, Uncle Grandpa, I'm actually a student. Oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to say that. But I'm actually, I was about to go into everything right there. But I'm majoring in history. So I could be I guess I could be a history professor. But I'm not, sadly. I'm still in college myself. But still, pretty funny one, Uncle Grandpa. And I hope that's based off the amount of historical context I always throw into what I say here on stream. And so with that, we are on to the next question.
And just real quick to answer a question out of the live chat, I saw NOYDB, who is a constant roaster of Alabama culture, who says, do you work in a coal mine or chain smoke? No, I don't do either. To answer that question, somebody said, Anthony Vendetti said, sounds like a well-traveled country western singer, and emphasis on the well-traveled part. And let's see here. Somebody said, Enforcer Matt, I envision him as a 60-year-old dude with a 10-gallon hat and a white handlebar mustache. I love this. This is great.
It's always funny to hear what everyone's got to say about you, man, because like I've heard a lot of things about you sound like a country redneck singer, like that's some kind of insult. But you know, I mean, like I find it funny, honestly. And then a lot of people say different things about my voice, and it's always just hilarious to hear what y'all got to say because some of y'all are actually pretty close. I've actually heard a couple of people describe me and what I look like very, very close to what I actually look like, and then some people are way off the mark. Like they're like, you're clean shaven with 6-pack abs. Oh no, that wrong on both of them. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question. But it's always fun to see what everyone thinks we look and we actually look like.
That's true. And moving on to the next one, we have a $5 donation from Eduardo Gonzalez again, who says, is it me or do the Russian supporters look like they need a steady supply of Ensure with calcium to keep going?
It kind of does. I think Matthew could actually talk on that one a little bit better because he is trying to bulk right now and he's drinking that muscle milk and lifting them weights and also swimming a lot. So I'll let Matthew actually take over on that one because I think he'd be more qualified to answer it than me.
And yes, to be precise, muscle milk is something for building muscle. I think Ensure is something for, I think elderly people. I'm not sure if that's accurate. I've really not educated that well on what Ensure actually is. Somebody's going to correct me in the live chat, I'm sure. But that's all I have to say about that, really.
All right. And with that, I hope that answers your question. And I thank you so much for the support. And with that, how many super chats do we have left?
So it looks like we currently have about 8 left.
All right. And so we're going to just keep answering these. And if anyone wants to throw in a super chat, feel free. But of course, we're always going to get to the live chat questions at the very end. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up here, we have a $5 donation from Jose Diaz, who does not leave a comment, so thank you very much, Jose, for the support. And up next, we have a $5 donation from Xavier Estrada, who says, United States Defense Secretary says that U.S. will supply weapons Ukraine needs. Why don't they keep silent and give Ukraine better weapons? Is the President of the United States appeasing Russia?
I don't really get into the political side of things because if I talk about like the current administration and that kind of mindset, then everyone always wants to draw comparisons with previous administrations. So I'm not going to answer it that way. But I will say that the United States, I will say this, regardless of whatever's going on in the government, the reason why you always hear about it so much is because a lot of people are trying to make political runs on this and build up reputation and credit with the public. That's why during oh, I almost stabbed myself with a screwdriver there. It fell off my table. That's why you just heard me go, ugh, because I was trying to catch it before it stabbed me in the stomach. But to give a little bit of context, during COVID, every single time, any time the government did anything, regardless of what party it was heavily publicized. It was always talked about. It was a huge deal, and they would talk about it for weeks before it actually happened. Now, during the Ukraine war, the exact same thing is happening with the parties flipped. And the whole reason that the government does this stuff on everything is so that way they can literally try and pull some kind of a publicity stunt with the public and garner more support and hopefully more votes for the next election. If they weren't really caring about elections, they would just go and send the support without really telling anyone. I mean, like, of course, they would make the information public, most likely, about what they're sending, because it is being sent over with taxpayer money. But it wouldn't be something they would harp on the news and make press releases about and stuff like that. Every single time anyone does that in the government, just know that they're not trying to let you know that they're a nice guy. They're actually doing that because they're trying to get reelected. So with that, I hope that answers the question. And and before everyone starts going political, because I hate even touching on American stuff because everyone wants to get all political in the comments. I'm not talking about, I'm just going to say the party's outright. I'm not talking about the Republicans or the Democrats. Both of them do it. And so I'm not sitting here trying to point out one party over the other. I'm literally pointing them both out equally. So I hope that answers the question. And I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up here, we have a $5 donation from Mamba Mentality, who says, if I can tell the Ukraine something, is hold the fort. Hold the fort until Russian army lose more morale and they start retaliating against their government and their army.
I would agree. I think that that's something that we could see in the future. I don't know when, and I don't really know exactly how, but I do think that the Russians will start to face some very serious domestic issues. I don't know if they're going to happen during the war, though, because I feel like there will be enough pressure on the public for it not to actually happen. But at the same time, I feel like if the war was to end, I think that's when most of the domestic upheaval will start. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And first off, I would say William Allen, absolutely tremendous support. Thank you right off the bat. He puts in another $50 super chat and says, here's to the Leaf Spring Army reunion in Mobile, Alabama at the USS Alabama. We could also take an overnight trip to Biloxi for some casino fun. Whoop.
Matthew knows the reason why I'm laughing there, but thank you so much for the support, William. It's greatly appreciated. And yes, I would go to the USS Alabama. That is a really cool ship. I'm not going to... Well, I'll pull it up on Google. Why not? USS Alabama. Let's go take a look at it. There it is on Google Maps. Let's go to it. Let's get off of that. Wait, that's not Google Maps. That's like Google something else. Wow, they don't have the Battleship Park on here? Let me just type in Mobile. Mobile, Alabama. The city of La Mobile. Mobile was actually started off as a city by the French. Well, not the French, the Spanish. You can actually find Fort Conde in there still, which was like, I guess you could say the very beginning of Mobile. It's somewhere around here. Nope. Let me try and find that real quick because it's an interesting little bit of history. Wow, are you kidding me? There it is, Fort Conde. It's like right on the interstate. They actually cut it up, which is a crime. They literally cut the fort apart to build Interstate 10. I think that's a disservice to history, honestly, and I find it deplorable. But beyond that, this fort's been around here since I think like the 1600s maybe. So it's been around for an incredibly long while. But moving from there across the water, there's also some other interesting things to note in Mobile. First, this is where a lot of the littoral class ships are built. You can actually see one of them here that just came straight out of dry dock. And I've actually been down there, and these two buildings right here are actually the buildings that they construct the littoral class combat ships in. And it's really interesting because you can actually just see them being built. They usually have the doors open, and they're just all in there working on these ships, which is bizarre. And then moving all the way across from Austell, which has one of the largest buildings in America in terms of the square footage, which is right there, we move over here to the USS Alabama. The USS Alabama and the museum surrounding it is incredibly cool. I will let y'all know my reenacting group actually does reenacting events here from time to time. I've never been. They go often, and they are actually the reenactors that'll be on the submarine if you ever go there, and they're there. They're the guys in the submarine. The USS Alabama is really cool, though. We'll talk about it. It's a South Dakota class ship. It's got 80,000 pictures. One of the most popular battleships in the United States in terms of its popularity. They even got an indoor museum with all kinds of cool aircraft. There's the interior view of the USS Drum. You can see a B-52. They've got one of those. Really cool. I mean, like, this place has got nothing but cool stuff. It's unbelievable. There's an M26 Pershing if you're into tanks. They've got a C-47 here, which is in kind of disrepair. A Sky Raider. I mean, like, they got all kinds of stuff, but I'm trying to find pictures of the battleship, and for some reason, I can't find them. Look, a T-55. Well, the Russians may need that thing. We may have to give it to them soon. It's a coastal patrol boat. How in the world did they not have pictures of the inside of the ship? I know photography is allowed. So where are the pictures of the inside? Oh, come on. F-14, if you're into that. By the way, they're dropping that in War Thunder tomorrow, just in case you play that game. Anyways, we'll just look at this picture. USS Alabama is really cool, and I'd highly suggest if y'all ever do come through Alabama to take a good look at this ship. It's got a very interesting history. It was called the Lucky A because not a single person was killed on that ship during the entirety of the war. Not a single person, and sometimes people are killed by accidents. That's kind of common. But not a single person died on that ship. And in fact, it was the first ship to enter Tokyo Bay at the end of World War II when the Japanese signed the unconditional surrender with the United States. So it's got a very interesting history to it. It's the pride and the symbol of Alabama down on the Gulf Coast, and everyone has to take a pilgrimage in Alabama to this ship in school as like a field trip. So I hope that kind of like addresses that. It is really cool. I have to agree, William. And I would think that would be a great place for the Leaf Spring Army to have meetings at. That would be really cool. But with that, I thank you so much for the support. Once again, I hope I didn't talk too long, and we can actually see some other cool aircraft down here, an F-15 and an F-16. But with that, we are on to the next question, and I thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have an $18 donation from Nerber777, who says, "Thanks for not having ads. Still can't work out how killing POWs is a good idea. Might just be me, but save a grenade take as many as I can with me."
Well, I thank you for the support. I don't know what the POW thing is about in particular, but I don't think killing POWs is ever... Well, wait a minute. Now I know what you're talking about. It's not a good idea to me. I don't know why the DPR and LPR are doing that. I feel like they're doing it out of raw cruelty, really. It's not really a point to send a message to anyone. They're just wanting to do it. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all, and I feel like it's barbaric. So I can agree with you 100% right there that I don't like what the DPR and LPR is doing. And I feel like the Ukrainians once again are taking the high ground, which is surprising how much and how often they do take the high ground. And while it has been a discussion tonight about the Ukrainians bombarding the suburb of Donetsk, and I'm saying it's kind of a war crime, and half of everyone's agreeing with me and half of everyone's disagreeing with me, I'm going to say that's a war crime, but that doesn't sully Ukraine's image to me. I still find it incredible that you don't see them just outright giving prisoners of war the death penalty. That's something to me, and it shows that they do have a lot of mercy. And whenever they have the chance, they try and show as much mercy, compassion, and humanity as possible. And so I can agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't think it's smart to kill POWs. And with that, thank you once again for the support, and we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have 3 super chats from CA Lags. The first one says, "There's a distinction between what is wrong and what is criminal. War crimes are criminal, atrocities are wrong."
I can agree, but atrocities and war crimes kind of mix into the same thing. Like the Holocaust, in a sense, was a war crime because sometimes Polish soldiers, Russian soldiers, and I believe even a few American soldiers happened to be sent to the concentration camps. Sometimes the Americans were sent because they were Jewish, and so they were just kind of thrown into that group and sent there as well. But that was an atrocity that kind of blended into a war crime. And also, like, for example, when the Germans went through and they would start leveling cities in Belarus and literally just killing the entire population, those were atrocities, but in a sense, they were also war crimes as well. So I get where you're coming from, but sometimes atrocities and war crimes just kind of mesh into the same thing and are almost indistinguishable. So with that, I hope that addresses that one, and we're on to the next one.
And to the next one, we have the other one from CA Lags, who says there are legal consequences to war crimes, and there are eternal consequences to atrocities.
I would agree. I would agree on that one, but I feel like war crime, like again, war crimes and atrocities are, in my opinion, kind of one and the same. But I can agree with that for the large part. So with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, CA Lag says if you want to get into politics, you have to prepare yourself with the gray, or else you cannot get elected.
That's something that's something I'd have to disagree with, and I feel like that's the problem with modern politics, is that all of the people who run for political positions are two-faced. They lie about almost everything. They get into gray areas. They can never answer a question straightforward. I feel like whether the answer to a question is good or bad, kind of like how half of everyone's disagree with me tonight about war crimes, I'm just going to stick to my guns and say what I would think. And if the situation is going good, it's going good. If it's going bad, it's going bad. We're working on it. We're trying to fix it. I don't like how that's getting political, but I feel like you don't really need to touch on the gray to become a politician. You just speak about the black and white. And if you speak the black and white truthfully enough, I feel like you should be able to win. So of course, that's not the direction that most politicians take, but then some have, like Theodore Roosevelt. I never heard of the guy being a two-faced guy and saying one thing and doing another. He went into the presidential election saying one thing, and he got in the office and he did that thing. And there was a couple of other presidents like James Polk who did the exact same thing. He said, if y'all elect me, we're going to war with Mexico. He got elected. He went to war with Mexico. He won, left the office after one term, and then died. And he did exactly what he said. So I feel like you don't always have to get into the gray to be a politician or a good one or win. So, I mean, I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much once again for the support, CA Lags. You've been around for a while, and of course, we're always appreciative for the support. And while we can always, everyone can always agree, disagree, I feel like it's great to just, chalk it up at the end of the day. They're just opinions, and opinions aren't going to kill anyone or hurt anyone. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one, and I thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $5 super chat from Jonesy again, who says, no brown snakes here. Plenty dugites and tiger snakes, though. Get yourselves some coffee.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and we will get ourselves some coffee, and we will look out for them brown snakes. Sneaky snake, go dancing. Anyways, thank you very much for the support, and we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Olivia McCarthy again, who says, I hear that Belarusian troops have started creeping up on Ukraine's northern border. It's kind of sus.
I have heard about that. That's been going on for quite a while, and I'm not really sure if it's going to lead to anything, because I don't believe the Belarusians really have the ability to pursue a serious war of any sort. So I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one. And also, real quick, we're going to have to put a cutoff on the super chats for the night. I thank everyone so much for the support. It's incredible. But I do want to make sure that Matthew can get some sleep, and also I can get some sleep as well. And so we're going to answer the remainder of the super chats for the night. We highly recommend if you want to put a super chat in, don't put one in. Put one in tomorrow, or buy some merch if you would like to just support the channel in general, because then you'll get something cool out of it that you actually can tangibly hold. And with that, we are going to move on to these next few super chats, and then we're going to move on to some live chat questions, and then round out the stream.
And next up, let me recognize two donations here. We have a $4 donation from Olivia McCarthy. Again, thank you very much for your continued support. And a $2 donation from RJ in New Hampshire. So thank you both very much of your support of the channel. My mind is starting to go on me a little bit, and I'm starting to trip up big, so please bear with me here. So up next, we have a $5 donation from Kevin Scott 76, who says, I'm wondering what video game will come from this war, Call of Duty or Battlefield. Hopefully you can play as Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And if I was to talk about this game, and it sounds a little crass to talk about video games right now. I kind of like how Fallujah was really controversial as a game back when Fallujah had just happened. But then Squad actually revived that whole idea and actually brought the Fallujah map to life, which I thought was cool. And I think they did a great service to the realism of it. Talking in the future, in a future context about Ukraine as a game, I can see a lot of games coming out of this war, and not just like Call of Duty and Battlefield. I think we could get a lot of grand strategy games where you play either the Russians or the Ukrainians. And I think there's a huge potential in the future. Much like everyone always makes video games about wars eventually. I think that there's huge potential here in the future for that here in the War of Ukraine as well. And if someone does come up with a game on the war where you can play as either the Ukrainians or the Russians and try and defend Ukraine or try and take it over, I'm 100% going to play Ukraine every single time and try and push all the way towards Moscow. So with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. It does help us out a lot, and I hope that did answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And I just want to recognize a super chat that just came in a moment ago. I know we put a cutoff on it, but we have to recognize it. It's from High Speed Chase, who puts in a $100 super chat. Very generous donation there. Who says, no question, just wanted to give some support. Thank you to the Enforcer crew. God bless the Leaf Spring Army and Slava Ukraine.
Well, I gotta thank you so much for the massive amount of support, High Speed Chase. That kind of support helps our channel a massive amount, and it lets me know that you wanted to give some support, because that's huge. So thank you once again for giving all of us recognition here. Matthew, me, the Discord mods, all of us. We all try our best to make sure that everything's nice, and at least on the channel that the news is incredibly good, as best as we can get it. And so thank you once again, High Speed Chase. You don't know how much that means to us, and I got to thank you once again. It's incredible. And so with that, thank you so much for the support. Yeah, I mean, like, just really thank you. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And if you have stuck around up until this point, you are a channel legend, because it looks like we have about 2,900 people still watching at about, let's see, about 1:30 Eastern. So pretty late. So y'all are all legends if you're still watching. You have made it to the last super chat question of the night, which is from Mamba Mentality, who puts in a $2 donation and says, give him more weapons and end the war sooner.
And I would agree. I think that Zelensky should get more weapons now and be able to end this war as fast as possible. And so with that, I saw one last super chat come in, Matthew, and we're going to address that one, and then we're going to go on to a couple of live chat questions and round out this stream.
And let's see here. The last super chat is from William Allen. Who else could it be from but William Allen, who puts in a $10 donation and says, unfortunate I won't be around when you turn 65. Would love to hear your philosophy after a few years of sipping a quote-unquote fine vintage wine.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, William. I hope you are around when I'm 65. Maybe medical technology will improve within the next decade or two, and maybe you can live for that long. But I will probably still be out there somewhere. It may not be on YouTube anymore. I may actually be well within the political sphere at that point, and I'll be giving out my philosophies probably at that age. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, William. And with that, I think we've reached the end of the super chats. If one does come in at this point, sadly, we aren't going to address it because it's marathon length at this point. When I say marathon, I mean like it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning over here for us. And so we're going to answer 2 live chat questions. I'm sorry that we're not doing 3, but we are really pressed for time right now. And so we're going to answer 2 live chat questions, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream.
So the first one up from the live chat is from Cherry Patterson, who says, do you think that Ukraine will keep Donbass? I see intense fighting there. Slava Ukraine.
I think that Ukraine will by and large keep the Donbass while the Russians do control about 95% of Luhansk and around 50% of Donetsk. The Ukrainians still control a sizable portion of it, and specifically actually around 4 major cities: Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk. And so I don't believe that the Russians will be declaring victory anytime soon, because the Ukrainians are holding their ground, the Russians are not gaining any, and the Russians still have a lot of ground to cover compared to the amount of advances they've ever made. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of the night. And so with that, what is the lucky last question that has been sent in for tonight's stream?
So the last question of the night goes to Ukraine F. Putin, who put it in a super chat earlier and now has a live chat question, who says, has the conflict in Ukraine demonstrated that even older weapons from World War II and the Cold War still hold some value and effectiveness in a modern war?
Yes, it has to a degree. We've seen Maxims being used a little bit. We've seen Mosins being used a little bit, although you never actually seen them shot. It looks like people just carry those around and we never actually see them used. But we have seen a couple of World War II weapons here and there, and I would have to say some of them do hold up, but in very limited circumstances. Of course, you can't just like use a Maxim as a light machine gun in a squad or anything, but in a fortified position, the Maxim is as good as about any other machine gun. Just as a specific instance. And we've seen a couple of other, I guess you could say, instances where they are usable. And that's something that a lot of people don't get, is that while wars do progress at an incredible speed, military technology hangs around for decades, usually about 100 years. What's really interesting to me is that the Brown Bess, as a historical example, is an incredible musket. I would say it's probably one of the best. The Charleville and the Brown Bess are pretty much neck and neck. The Brown Bess entered British service around 1734, I believe, and it stayed in service in some kind of way in some military somewhere until the present day. In Afghanistan, you could find Mujahideen and Taliban fighters still using Brown Besses and actually shooting them at the Americans. On top of that, just as an actual example of it being used in a real war, one of the last recorded instances of it being used by an actual army is at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. A Confederate soldier was noted by a general to be using a Brown Bess that his family had inherited over almost 100 years, and he was using it in the Battle of Shiloh. And so it kind of gives you an idea that while the Brown Bess as a design and a weapon was around 100 years old at that point, and military technology had progressed rapidly from the Brown Bess to the Civil War, they were still using old technology, and it was usable in some instances. And so with that, I hope that does address the question in a way. I do believe that older technologies are still usable, although in a limited app. The end of the stream. A degree point where those weapons become dated and there are far more favorable systems. I'm not one of those weirdos on the internet that goes, oh, the King Tiger from World War II could beat the M1 Abrams. Not saying that at all, but I am saying that in some aspects, some weapons do still have some limited usability. And so with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching once again. It has been a pleasure to report the news to all of y'all, and I hope y'all found the news and the question segment enjoyable. If you have made it to this point, then you are a trooper, and I highly suggest that you do subscribe, because we do run these streams every single day of the week except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war, and we also upload daily summaries where we talk about the war in brief for a few minutes. So with that, I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Thank you all once again, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Good night, and take care.